The last thing Izuku Midoriya remembered clearly was the smell of ozone and burnt asphalt, and Bakugo's voice yelling something he couldn't make out over the roar of collapsing concrete. There had been a villain, a reality warping type, some C-list rogue with a grudge and a quirk nobody had properly cataloged yet, and a building coming down over a crowd of civilians, and Izuku doing what Izuku always did, which was throw himself at the problem without doing the math on whether he'd survive it. He remembered green light. He remembered the peculiar stomach-dropping sensation of falling in a direction that wasn't down. Then he remembered nothing, for a while. When the world came back, it came back wrong. He was lying on cold, seamless composite flooring, the kind that gleamed even under fluorescent light, in a room too clean to be anywhere he recognized. No scuffed linoleum, no smell of a city that actually breathed, just the faint hum of climate control and the distant, tinny sound of a television playing somewhere behind glass. His gauntlet, cracked from 3 separate fights that week, held together with more duct tape than metal at this point, sat heavy and familiar on his right hand, which was the only thing keeping him from full-blown panic in that first disoriented half-minute. Okay, he thought, running silent inventory, the way Aizawa-sensei had drilled into all of them. Injuries, bruised ribs, minor. Location, unknown. Threat level, unknown. Quirk, active. He sat up. The room resolved into something like a corporate atrium. Soaring ceilings, a wall of glass looking out over a city skyline that was almost New York, almost familiar, and almost entirely wrong. The proportions of the buildings were off in a way he couldn't articulate. The billboards were wrong too. One, enormous, wrapped 3 stories of a neighboring tower, showing a man in a blue and red suit with a gold cape, mid-flight, chin lifted, radiating a kind of manufactured heroism that made the hair on Izuku's arms stand up before he understood why. Homelander, America's #1 hero, Vought International. He didn't recognize the name. He didn't recognize the company. He didn't recognize anything, and the wrongness of that settled into his chest like a stone. Okay, he said aloud this time, quietly, mostly to hear his own voice and confirm it still worked. Okay, think, Izuku, think. He was midway through cataloging exits. 3, 1 glass, 2 service doors half hidden by decorative paneling, when the alarm hit. It wasn't a siren, not exactly. It was worse, in its way, a calm, synthesized woman's voice, piped through hidden speakers, informing whoever might be listening that an unregistered anomaly had been detected in Sub-Level 4, Research Wing C, and that all personnel should proceed to designated safe zones per protocol. The calm of it, the sheer institutional boredom in a voice announcing that something had torn a hole in the world, unsettled Izuku more than screaming would have. Then the glass doors at the far end of the atrium hissed open, and 6 people in black tactical gear came through fast, weapons already up, fanning into a loose semicircle around him with the drilled efficiency of people who had done this before. Not for him, specifically. For something like him, generically. That distinction mattered, and Izuku filed it away. Don't move, the lead operative said. Female voice, flat, professional. Hands where I can see them. Izuku raised both hands slowly, gauntlet and all, doing the fast mental math he always did in a crisis. 6 operatives, standard firearms, no visible quirk users among them, no obvious means of restraining someone with actual power if I chose to resist. He didn't like what the math told him about what kind of world assembled a response team like this for an anomaly instead of a person. I'm not going to hurt anyone, he said, keeping his voice even, doing the thing his mother always said made people trust him, not shouting, not flinching, just steady. I don't know where I am. I don't know how I got here. I'm not a threat, I promise. That's what they all say, muttered one of the operatives, and got a sharp look from the lead for it. For a long, suspended moment, nobody moved. Izuku held perfectly still, hands raised, doing everything in his power to look like exactly what he was, a scared kid a very long way from home, not a weapon. It was the woman who finally broke the standoff, And not with force. She came through the same doors the tactical team had, but unhurried, heels clicking against the composite floor, dressed in a sharp charcoal suit that looked more expensive than anything Izuku owned, hair pulled back so tight it looked painful. She had the particular energy of someone who had learned to project calm as a professional skill rather than an emotional state. "Stand down," she said to the team, not looking at them, eyes fixed on Izuku the whole time with an expression he couldn't quite parse, something between fascination and calculation. "Stand down. Jesus, put the guns away, you're going to give the poor kid a heart attack. And he doesn't look dangerous, he looks like he wandered out of a cosplay convention." The lead operative hesitated, clearly unhappy, but lowered her weapon at a second, sharper look from the woman. The rest followed. "Sorry about that," the woman said, turning the full wattage of a customer service smile on Izuku like she was flipping a switch. "Ashley Barrett, Head of Talent Relations, Vought International. And you are..." She glanced down at a tablet one of the operatives had passed her, some scanner readout Izuku couldn't see the details of. An anomaly with no ID, no registration, and readings that are, and I want to be honest with you, kind of freaking out our science division. So, what should I call you? Izuku lowered his hands slowly, still cataloging. Vought International, Talent Relations, Registration, a science division that scans people, and answered honestly, because lying had never once worked out well for him, and he doubted this was the moment to start. "Izuku Midoriya," he said. "Some people call me Deku." "Deku," Ashley repeated, tasting the word, already visibly composing something. A headline, a pitch. Izuku couldn't tell which. "Okay, Deku. That's actually kind of great, honestly. It's got a ring to it. Can I ask what you can do, Deku?" "Because our sensors are reading something we've genuinely never logged before, and believe me, we've logged some weird stuff." This was the part Izuku had learned to be careful about, not because he was ashamed of One for All. Never that. But because in his world, power without context was dangerous, and he still had no idea what kind of world this was. Homelander, Vought International, tactical response teams for a single unregistered person. None of it added up to anywhere safe. "I'd rather show you," he said carefully, "in a situation where nobody has to get hurt to see it." Something flickered across Ashley's face. Irritation, quickly smoothed over into that same professional smile. "Sure, of course, we can absolutely do a supervised demonstration once we've got you processed. No pressure at all." A pause, and then, almost too casually, "You're not registered with any agency we're aware of. No Vought file, no CIA file, no independent contractor paperwork." That's unusual for someone with your kind of readings." "I'm not from here," Izuku said, which was the simplest true thing he had. Ashley's smile didn't waver, but something behind her eyes sharpened. "Right. Of course you're not. Nobody's ever from here. First day. Listen, why don't we get you somewhere more comfortable than sub-level 4? Get you a coffee, maybe a sandwich. You look like you haven't eaten in a week, and we can figure out exactly where you're from, and what you can do, and how Vought can help you." Help me, Izuku thought. And something about the phrase, offered so readily, so fast, to a total stranger who had just triggered a security lockdown, didn't sit right. But he was hungry, and disoriented, and alone in a world he understood nothing about, and the alternative to trusting someone was standing in a sub-level with armed guards until he made a decision by default. "Okay," he said. "Thank you." The walk up through Vought Tower, because that was apparently what this building was called, Izuku learned, an entire skyscraper devoted to a single company, took almost 20 minutes and passed through more security checkpoints than Izuku had seen in his entire life at UA, including the day the League of Villains attacked. Every checkpoint had cameras, every hallway had cameras. Somewhere around the 40th floor, Izuku understood with a slow, creeping unease that he had not stopped being watched, evaluated, and quietly recorded since the moment the woman in the charcoal suit had walked through those doors. Ashley talked the whole way up, About the building, about Vaught's storied history, about the incredible opportunities available to someone with his kind of profile, in a stream of practiced enthusiasm that Izuku recognized, with a jolt, as fundamentally identical to a sales pitch. He'd sat through enough hero agency recruitment talks back home to know the rhythm even in a stranger's mouth, in a stranger's world. They reached an office on the 68th floor. Glass walls, a view that made Izuku's stomach lurch a little, an entire skyline he didn't recognize spread out gold and glittering in what looked like late afternoon light. A tray of food was already waiting, absurdly, as if someone had known exactly when they'd arrive down to the minute. "Eat," Ashley said, gesturing at the tray, settling into a chair across a low glass table from him. "Seriously, you look like hell." Izuku ate. It was, he had to admit, very good. "So," Ashley said, once he'd made a visible dent in the food, tablet back in hand, voice shifting into something a little more businesslike, "let's talk about what happens next. Vought is the largest, frankly the only, soup management company in the country. We handle everything: training, branding, media, legal protection, government liaison. Every hero you've probably heard of, well, you haven't heard of any of them, which is its own thing we should probably talk about. But every hero anyone's heard of works with us. Homelander, Starlight, the entire 7 roster. If you've got powers, and you want a life that isn't running from black site labs for the rest of it, Vought is genuinely your best option. Your only real option, if I'm honest." "What happens to people who don't want to work with Vought?" Izuku asked, keeping his tone carefully neutral. Ashley's smile flickered, just slightly, before resetting. "Nobody's forced into anything," she said, a beat too fast. "But realistically, an unregistered individual with your kind of power reading, wandering around with no documentation, no history, no oversight, that's not a great position to be in. Not safe for you. Not safe for the public, frankly, until we understand exactly what you can do. Vought protects people like you, from the government, from black market interests who'd love to get their hands on someone with your profile, from yourself, honestly, until you know what you're working with." It was, Izuku thought, a genuinely well-constructed pitch. Safety, protection, belonging, all real needs, wrapped around something he couldn't quite see the shape of yet, and he didn't like that he couldn't see it. "Can I ask you something?" he said instead. "Shoot. That poster, outside, the big one, Homelander, he's your top hero?" "The hero," Ashley said, and there was something reverent in it, or something performing reverence so consistently it had become indistinguishable from the real thing. "Leader of the 7. Strongest soup in the world, full stop. You'll meet him, probably. Stan likes to personally vet anyone with readings like yours." Stan Edgar, CEO. A pause, and Ashley's eyes flicked to something off-screen on her tablet, reading, her expression shifting into something more careful. "Actually, speak of the devil. Deku, I'm going to need you to sit tight for just a minute, okay? Eat your sandwich. I'll be right back." She left. The glass door swung shut behind her with a soft, expensive click, and Izuku sat alone in a 68th floor office in a city that wasn't his, surrounded by a company that had responded to his arrival with armed operatives and a sales pitch in the same 20 minutes, and let himself, finally, feel the full weight of how far from home he actually was. Through the glass wall far below, the city moved. Cars, people, an ordinary Tuesday for everyone down there who had no idea a boy from another world had just fallen into the middle of theirs. Somewhere out past the skyline, unseen, unregistered by any of Vaught's sensors, other lives were already colliding with the fact of his arrival. A grizzled man in a bomber jacket who was about to get a call about an anomaly from a contact inside Vaught's walls. A blonde woman in a Starlight costume finishing a photo op 3 blocks away with a headache she couldn't yet explain. A CEO on the 70th floor, reading a report and deciding, calmly, exactly how much of the truth this new arrival deserved to hear. Izuku didn't know any of that yet. He only knew that the food was good, the smiles were too practiced, and somewhere underneath Ashley Barrett's warmth was a machine that had already started deciding what he was worth. He finished the sandwich. He waited. And for the first time since the world had gone green and sideways, he let himself think, quietly, carefully. I need to find out what kind of place this really is, before it decides what kind of person I'm going to be in it. The door opened again. Ashley's smile was back in place, brighter than before, stretched a little too wide. "Change of plans," she said. "Stan wants to meet you personally, right now." The elevator to the 70th floor required a key card, a retinal scan, and, Izuku noticed, filing it away with the same instinct that had once made him fill 13 notebooks on hero analysis. A brief, wordless nod between Ashley and the security guard standing sentry beside the doors. The kind of nod that meant, "This is unusual, and we both know it." "You'll like Stan," Ashley said, in the too bright voice of someone trying to convince herself as much as him. "Everyone likes Stan. He's very measured." The doors opened onto an office that made the 68th floor look modest. Floor-to-ceiling glass wrapped three sides of the room, the city spread out gold and hazy in the late light, and behind a desk of dark, immaculate wood sat an older man with silver hair and calm, assessing eyes, hands folded, watching Izuku's entrance with an attention that felt less like curiosity and more like an audit. "Mr. Midoriya," the man said, and his voice was quiet in a way that somehow filled the room more thoroughly than shouting would have. "Or Deku, I understand you prefer. Please, sit." "Thank you for having me," Izuku said, because his mother had raised him with manners even for situations his mother could never have imagined, and settled into the chair across the desk. Ashley hovered near the door, uncertain whether she'd been dismissed. "That will be all, Ashley." She left. The door sealed with a soft, airtight hiss, and Izuku was alone with the man who ran, apparently, the only company in this world that mattered. "Stan Edgar," the man said. "Chief Executive Officer, Vought International." "I've read Ashley's initial report. I've also read the sensor logs from Research Wing C, which register power readings." He glanced down at a folder open on the desk, though Izuku had the distinct impression he'd already memorized every word in it, that don't correspond to anything in 40 years of soup data. "Compound V doesn't produce what your biometrics are showing, so I'll ask you directly, because I find directness saves us both time. What are you, and where did you actually come from?" There was no threat in the question, no raised voice, nothing Izuku could point to and call aggressive. And yet something about the sheer stillness of the man asking it made Izuku's instincts, the ones honed across 2 years of reading villains, reading heroes, reading the gap between what people said and what they meant, stand fully at attention. "I'm not lying when I say I don't fully understand it myself," Izuku said carefully. "Where I'm from, there's something we call a quirk, a power, passed down, sometimes inherited, sometimes given. Mine is called One for All. It's been passed down through people, one to the next, for generations. I got mine less than 2 years ago." He paused. "There was an accident. A villain, a collapsing building, and then I wasn't there anymore. I was here." Stan Edgar listened without interrupting, without so much as shifting in his chair, and when Izuku finished, he was quiet for a long moment, turning something over. "A power that transfers between people," he said finally. "Not genetic, not chemical, chosen." "Yes, that's a remarkable thing to have simply fall into our world," Stan said, and there was something underneath the words Izuku couldn't quite place. Not disbelief exactly. Something more like a man recalculating a very large equation. "In this world, power is currency, Mr. Midoriya. It's manufactured, it's sold, it's fought over. The idea that it might simply be given, freely, to someone judged worthy of it, that's going to be a difficult story for a great many people to hear, and an even more difficult one for me to control the telling of." "I'm not trying to cause trouble," Izuku said. "I just want to find a way home. If there is one, perhaps there is. Perhaps there isn't." Stan folded his hands. "In the meantime, you exist. You have power that, from what our instruments could measure in a 30-second uncontrolled reading, appears to exceed our current top-tier assets. And you are, as of this afternoon, the single most interesting variable to enter this company's orbit in over a decade. A pause, precise as a scalpel. I'd like to know what you intend to do with that. Izuku held the man's gaze and found, underneath the calm and the money and the glass office 70 floors up, something that reminded him, uncomfortably, of certain villains he'd faced. Not cruelty, just a total absence of sentiment about anything that wasn't useful. I intend to help people, Izuku said. That's it. That's the whole plan. Wherever I am, whatever this world turns out to be, that doesn't change. Something that might, in a different face, have been the beginning of a smile, crossed Stan Edgar's mouth and vanished. Admirable, he said, in a tone that could have meant anything. And naive. If you'll forgive me, though naivety in a person of your power is, I'll admit, a more interesting problem than cynicism would be. Cynical soups are predictable. They can be bought. I'm not yet sure what buys you. Nothing, Izuku said, before he could stop himself, and immediately felt the weight of having said it too fast, too defensively. A tell, and he knew it, and from the flicker in Stan's eyes, so did Stan. We'll see, Stan said mildly. Here is what I propose, Mr. Midoriya. Vought will house you, feed you, and, within reason, help you search for a way back to wherever you came from, on the condition that you allow our research division limited, non-invasive study of your abilities, and that you refrain from any public displays of power until we've had the chance to properly assess and, frankly, manage the narrative around your existence. This world is not accustomed to good surprises. I'd like to control the introduction, for your safety as much as ours. It sounded, on its surface, entirely reasonable. Izuku had spent 2 years at UA, learning that the things that sounded most reasonable were often exactly where the trap was set. And if I say no to the study? Izuku asked. If I just want to look for a way home on my own? Stan's expression didn't change at all, which was somehow more unsettling than if it had. Then you're a free individual in a country that has laws about unregistered soups, no documentation, and, as of an hour ago, a security incident logged under my company's name in a building with government oversight contracts. I would genuinely prefer not to see how that plays out for you. I doubt you would either. There it was, the velvet, and underneath it, exactly the shape of the hand. I understand, Izuku said quietly, and meant several different things by it. Good. Stan rose, buttoning his jacket, the meeting apparently concluding on his schedule and no one else's. Ashley will handle your accommodations. I'd encourage you to enjoy Vought's hospitality, Mr. Midoriya. It's considerably better than most alternatives available to someone in your position. He paused at the door, and for just a moment, something almost curious crossed his face. One more thing. You said your power was given to you, chosen by the person who held it before. In our world, that would make you the first Supe I've ever encountered who was selected for something other than an accident of birth or a lab's experiment, a beat. I'd be curious to know, someday, what exactly you were selected for. He left before Izuku could answer, which Izuku suspected was entirely intentional. Vought's hospitality turned out to mean a suite 3 floors below the executive level, luxurious in a way that made Izuku uncomfortable. All clean lines and expensive fabric, and a window that looked out over a city he still didn't understand. And, more usefully, a television. He'd meant to sleep. Instead, he found himself sitting cross-legged on a bed too soft for someone who'd spent 2 years training on UA's gymnasium mats, flipping through channels with the same compulsive research instinct that had once filled his hero notebooks, trying to build a picture of the world he'd landed in from whatever it chose to broadcast about itself. It did not take long to understand that this world's heroes were not what he'd trained 2 years of his life to become. There was a talk show, bright colors, a laughing host, interviewing a soup named A-Train about a new energy drink endorsement. There was a segment on the Seven's latest movie, something called Dawn of the Seven, with a trailer full of slow-motion heroics that felt, to Izuku's trained eye, oddly staged, oddly choreographed in a way real combat never was. There was a news ticker at the bottom of one channel, almost buried under the entertainment coverage, mentioning, briefly, without elaboration, an isolated Supe-related incident downtown with 3 confirmed injuries, gone from the screen in under 10 seconds, replaced by a commercial for Compound V adjacent protein bars. He sat with that for a long time. Back home, an incident with 3 injuries would have led every broadcast for a full news cycle. There would have been analysis, accountability, a Hero Commission investigation, at minimum, and probably Endeavor scowling through a press conference about response times. Here, it had been a 10-second mention, sandwiched between a laugh track and an ad. They bury it, Izuku thought, and the realization settled into his stomach like a stone. They don't investigate. They bury it and move on to the next commercial. He was still turning that over, still building, piece by piece, the shape of exactly what Stan Edgar's managing the narrative actually meant in practice, when a soft knock came at the door. It wasn't Ashley. It was a young woman in her 20s, dark hair pulled back, dressed in what looked like a lab coat over civilian clothes, carrying a tablet and an expression of someone doing a job she found more interesting than she was supposed to admit. Mr. Midoriya? I'm Dr. Reyes, Research Division. Mr. Edgar authorized a preliminary consultation. Nothing invasive, just some questions, if that's all right. I have to be honest. I've been dying to talk to you since the report came in. Whatever you are, you broke 3 of our sensors. There was something genuine in the way she said it. Not the polished, performed warmth of Ashley's sales pitch, but real, unguarded curiosity. And Izuku, starved for a single honest conversation in this entire disorienting day, found himself relaxing, larikande, just slightly, for the first time since he'd woken up on the seamless floor of Sub-Level 4. Ask away, he said. I'll answer what I can. They talked for almost 2 hours. Dr. Reyes asked good questions, genuinely good ones, about the mechanics of a power that passed between people, about whether it left any trace on the person who'd given it up, about whether Izuku had chosen to receive it or simply been chosen. And Izuku found himself, despite everything, talking more freely than he had all day. About All Might, about the year of training that had nearly broken him before it built him back up stronger, about what it had felt like the day the greatest hero he'd ever known had looked at him, quirkless, and said, "You can become a hero too." Dr. Reyes went very quiet at that part. "That's not how it works here," she said finally, setting down her tablet. "Powers here don't get given like that, not as a gift. Compound V is injected mostly in infancy, and it either works or it doesn't, and nobody chooses who gets it based on whether they're good, worthy, whatever word you used. That seems like it would go wrong a lot," Izuku said carefully. Something crossed Dr. Reyes's face. Quick, unguarded, immediately suppressed. "You have no idea," she said, and then, catching herself, professional mask sliding back into place. "I shouldn't. I'm not supposed to editorialize. Thank you for your time tonight, Mr. Midoriya. This has been genuinely fascinating." She gathered her tablet, headed for the door, and paused there, hand on the frame, back to him. "For what it's worth," she said, not quite turning around, "I hope whatever picked you back home knew what it was doing, because if there's ever been a version of a Supe this place actually needed." She didn't finish the sentence. She left instead, quickly, like she'd already said more than she meant to. Izuku sat alone in the suite for a long time after that, the television murmuring in the background, the city glittering wrong-shaped and unfamiliar outside the window, and thought about buried news segments and choreographed heroics, and a scientist who'd nearly said something true before catching herself. Whatever this place actually needed. He didn't know yet what that meant, but he intended to find out, and he had the growing, uneasy certainty that whatever the answer turned out to be, Vought International was not going to be the one to hand it to him honestly. Somewhere across the city, in a cramped apartment above a shuttered laundromat, a man named Billy Butcher was ending a phone call with a contact deep inside Vought's research division, jotting 3 words on the back of a takeout menu in handwriting that looked like a threat even at rest. New Supe, unregistered, watch. The machine had already started turning, Izuku just didn't know yet how many gears it had. The first crack came 4 days later, and it came, fittingly, from a place Vought's PR machine hadn't bothered to spin yet, the news feed running silently on a monitor in the 68th floor break room, glimpsed by accident while Izuku waited for Ashley to finish a call. By then, his days had settled into a rhythm that felt less like hospitality and more like a very well-decorated holding pattern. Mornings were consultations with Dr. Reyes, genuinely interesting, genuinely the best part of his day, full of careful questions about One for All that never once asked him to demonstrate it at full strength. Afternoons were Ashley, walking him through Vought's campus, introducing him to department heads, floating phrases like brand alignment and market positioning with increasing frequency. Testing, Izuku had begun to realize how he'd respond to being talked about as a product rather than a person. Evenings were his own, which meant the television, and the growing, patient project of understanding exactly what kind of world he'd fallen into. He'd learned a lot in 4 days. He'd learned that the Seven ran this world's hero landscape the way UA's top students might have run things if the Hero Public Safety Commission had simply evaporated and nobody had replaced it. He'd learned that soups were largely made, not born, compound V, injected in infancy, a chemical lottery instead of a genetic one. He'd learned that Vought's stock price moved visibly on the days a Seven-member did something heroic on camera, and that this fact seemed to trouble absolutely no one but him. And on the 5th morning, waiting for Ashley in the break room, he learned about the fire. It was barely a segment, 90 seconds, tucked between a weather report and an ad for a Vought theme park, showing scorched wreckage of an apartment complex in a part of the city Izuku hadn't been shown yet. A reporter standing grim-faced in front of it, voice pitched to the particular flat cadence of someone reading copy she hadn't written. Tragic incident in Riverside Heights overnight, where a fire claimed the lives of 4 residents. Fire officials cite faulty wiring as the cause. Vought International, whose corporate housing initiative built the complex 2 years ago, has pledged its full support to the victims' families during this difficult time. The segment ended. The weather resumed. Nobody in the break room so much as looked up. Izuku sat very still, running the numbers the way his old habits demanded. Faulty wiring. In a building Vought had built 2 years ago, in a segment 90 seconds long, buried between weather and an ad. He didn't have proof of anything. He had, instead, the specific, trained instinct of someone who'd spent 2 years learning to read the gap between an official story and the truth underneath it. And every part of that instinct was screaming, "Something wrong?" Dr. Reyes's voice, behind him. She'd come in for coffee, tablet under one arm, and followed his gaze to the now blank screen. "That fire," Izuku said carefully. "Riverside Heights. Do you know anything about it?" Something shuddered behind Dr. Reyes's eyes. Fast, but Izuku had spent 2 years reading exactly that kind of flicker on faces that knew more than they were saying. "Just what was on the news," she said too evenly. "Faulty wiring. Terrible thing." "You don't believe that," Izuku said. It wasn't a question. For a moment, Dr. Reyes said nothing at all, just stood very still with her coffee cooling in her hand, clearly running some private calculation of her own. How much to say? To whom? In a building she'd already half admitted was listening to everything. "There was a soupe," she said finally, voice dropped almost to nothing. "Low level. Registered, but low priority. Nobody Vought bothered marketing. He lived in that building. There was an incident 2 nights before the fire. An argument. An unregistered discharge of his ability. Minor property damage. Nothing that should have made headlines." She glanced toward the door, toward the hallway beyond it, and lowered her voice further still. "I don't know anything, Izuku. I want to be very clear about that. I know a fire happened 2 days after a soupe I'd never heard mentioned again had an unregistered incident in that same building. That's all I know. That's genuinely all I'm going to say." She left before Izuku could ask another question, and this time she didn't pause at the door with something almost said. This time she just left, fast. The particular urgency of someone trying to put distance between herself and a conversation she already regretted having. Izuku sat alone in the break room for a long time after that, replaying it. A soupe nobody bothered marketing. An incident. A fire 2 days later. 4 dead. 90 seconds of coverage between weather and an ad. It wasn't proof. He knew that. It was a pattern and a scientist's carefully measured fear, and a news segment with the specific bloodless cadence of a story someone had shaped rather than reported. And none of that would hold up as evidence in any court, in any Hero Commission hearing, in any of the frameworks Izuku had spent 2 years learning to trust. But he'd learned something else in 2 years of training under the world's greatest hero. Something that had nothing to do with evidence and everything to do with instinct, honed by watching thousands of hours of hero and villain footage. This is what a cover-up feels like from the outside. This is exactly what it feels like. He found Ashley an hour later in her office, mid-call, and waited with a patience that cost him more than it looked like it did until she hung up. "Deku, perfect timing actually. I wanted to talk to you about the fire in Riverside Heights," Izuku said. 2 days after an unregistered discharge from a soup living there. "I want to know what happened." Ashley's smile flickered. The same flicker he'd seen in Dr. Reyes's eyes, he realized. The specific tell of someone recalculating how much a person in front of them was allowed to know, and reset, fast, into something bright and reasonable. "That's a really sad story, actually," she said, "and I totally understand wanting to know more, but that's a closed incident. It's been through fire marshal investigation. It's genuinely just faulty wiring, tragic timing." "You knew which fire I meant before I finished the sentence," Izuku said quietly. "I didn't say where it was." The silence that followed lasted exactly 3 seconds too long. "Deku," Ashley said, voice dropping the sales pitch entirely for what might have been the first time since he'd met her. "I need you to understand something about how this works. You're new here. You don't know this world yet. There are things that happen, accidents, incidents, situations that get managed, because the alternative to managing them is public panic, stock crashes, government crackdowns that hurt every single soup in this country, not just the ones who screwed up. It's not as simple as covering things up. It's triage." 4 people died, Izuku said, and he heard his own voice go flat and cold in a way he rarely let it, the tone he'd only ever used facing down villains who'd hurt people who couldn't fight back. "Did Vought cover up how they died?" "I don't have that information," Ashley said, and for the first time, Izuku believed a claim of ignorance from her completely, not because she was innocent, but because he understood, with sudden clarity, that not knowing was itself the design. Ashley wasn't lying to him. Ashley genuinely didn't know, because people above her had built the machine specifically so that people at her level never had to. "I want to know who did," Izuku said. "That's really not Ashley." He said her name gently, but he didn't move, didn't blink, didn't offer her the exit she was visibly hoping for. "I told Mr. Edgar I intend to help people. That doesn't stop being true just because it's inconvenient for a press release." Ashley studied him for a long moment, and something shifted in her expression, something that wasn't quite respect but was adjacent to it. The specific look of someone recalibrating an asset's category from manageable to complicated. "I'll see what I can find out," she said finally, quietly. "But Deku, be careful how loud you say things like that in this building. People are always listening. That's not a threat, that's just how it is here." She wasn't wrong, and the fact that she'd said it like a kindness rather than a warning told Izuku more about Vought International than 4 days of consultations and carefully curated campus tours had managed to. That night, back in the suite, Izuku stood at the window for a long time, looking out over a city skyline that still didn't feel like his, turning over 4 days of half-truths and buried segments and a scientist's fear-dropped voice, and made a decision with the same quiet, immovable certainty that had once carried him through a year of training that should have broken him. "I'm not going to be a billboard," he thought. "I'm not going to be an asset that gets managed. Whatever I am here, whatever I'm for, I'm going to find out what actually happened in that building, and I'm going to find out what this Homelander really is, behind that poster, and I'm going to do it whether Vought hands me the truth or makes me go looking for it myself." He didn't know yet that 3 miles across the city, in a cramped apartment that smelled permanently of stale coffee and cigarette smoke, a man named Billy Butcher had just finished reading a 5-page dossier on him, compiled from a source deep inside Vaught's research division, full of half-confirmed rumors, and one grainy security still of a boy in green catching a falling soup with his bare hands, and had reached a conclusion of his own. "New soup?" Butcher said to the room, to Huey Campbell perched uneasily on the arm of a threadbare couch, to Mother's Milk leaning against the far wall with his arms crossed. Vaught's got him locked up nice and pretty in the tower, feeding him sandwiches and sunshine. Question is whether he's another one of their good little soldiers, or whether he's something Vought hasn't figured out how to own yet. And if he's the second one, Huey asked. Butcher's smile had no warmth in it at all. Then we go find out exactly what he's worth to us before Vought decides what he's worth to them. Outside, 4 floors up and across the city, Izuku Midoriya went to sleep with a plan half-formed and no idea at all that he'd just become the single most contested asset in 2 very different wars. The boys found him on a Thursday, and they did it the way Izuku would come to learn they did everything, not with a plan so much as a controlled collision, engineered to look like an accident to anyone watching, including, for the first several minutes, Izuku himself. Vought had finally allowed him off campus, a supervised public familiarization outing, Ashley had called it, with a PR handler trailing 3 steps behind and a driver idling at the curb of every stop, the leash disguised as a courtesy. They'd taken him to a park near the waterfront, manicured and camera-friendly, the kind of place Izuku suspected had been chosen specifically because nothing unscripted ever happened there. He was wrong about that, as it turned out, in a very specific and orchestrated way. He noticed the man on the bench because his instincts made him notice everyone. A stocky man in a dark bomber jacket, unshaven, reading a folded newspaper with the specific stillness of someone who was not actually reading it. Izuku had spent 2 years learning to read a room full of potential threats without looking like he was doing it, and everything about the man's posture, weight balanced, eyes tracking without moving his head, positioned at an angle that gave him sightlines on both the park entrance and Izuku's PR handler, told him this wasn't a stranger enjoying a Thursday afternoon. "Give us a minute," the man said, not looking up from the newspaper, as Izuku's handler drifted within 10 feet. The handler, young, nervous, clearly new to whatever tier of Vought employment involved babysitting an unregistered anomaly, hesitated, hand drifting toward the radio clipped to her belt. "I said," the man repeated, and this time he did look up, and there was something in his eyes that made even Izuku's trained nerves go tight. "Give us a minute. Go get yourself a coffee, love. Kid's not going anywhere. I'll have him back before your bosses even notice he's not glued to your hip." "Sir, I can't just—" "Billy," Izuku said quietly, before he'd fully decided to say anything at all. The name surfacing from 4 days of half-confirmed rumors Dr. Reyes had let slip, half-heard mentions on late-night broadcasts about a vigilante crew that Vaught's PR machine referred to, when it referred to them at all, in tones of careful dismissal. "Billy Butcher." The man's eyebrows rose, genuine surprise flickering under the practiced stillness. "Well," he said, "someone's been doing their homework. Sir, I really have to insist." The handler tried again, and this time Izuku turned to her, offered the calmest, most reassuring smile he had in his repertoire, the one he'd used 100 times on frightened civilians mid-rescue. "It's okay," he said. "I'll be fine. Give us a few minutes, please." She looked between them, Butcher's flat, unblinking patience, and Izuku's steady reassurance, and made the calculation Izuku suspected she'd been trained to make in exactly this situation. Report up the chain. Don't escalate alone. She retreated toward the car, radio already at her ear, and Izuku understood he'd just bought himself minutes, not more. "Sit down," Butcher said, folding the newspaper, nodding at the bench. "Won't take long. I know your handler's already ringing it in." Izuku sat. Up close, Butcher had the specific weathered look of a man who'd spent a very long time being angry about something and had stopped bothering to hide it, and underneath the casual menace, something that read, to Izuku's practiced eye, as genuine exhaustion, the kind that came from years, not days. "You know who I am," Butcher said. Question is whether you know what I do. I've heard rumors, Izuku said carefully. Vought doesn't talk about you much. When they do, it's not flattering. Imagine that. Butcher's smile was thin and humorless. Here's what I do, kid. In plain terms, since Vought's clearly been feeding you the pretty version of this world for 4 days straight, I hunt supes. Not all of them, the ones who hurt people and get away with it because Vought's got enough money and enough lawyers to make sure they never see a courtroom. The ones who think Compound V makes them gods and the rest of us are just, he made a small, contemptuous gesture, collateral. I've watched good people get destroyed by supes who never faced a single consequence for it, because Vought's entire business model is making sure consequences never happen. So, that's me. That's what I do. Izuku sat with that for a moment, weighing it against 4 days of buried news segments and a scientist's fear-flattened voice. The fire in Riverside Heights, Izuku said. Do you know what actually happened there? Something shifted behind Butcher's eyes. Real attention, sharpening. Now that's an interesting question for you to be asking. 4 days into your stay at the tower, what did Vought tell you? Faulty wiring, I'd bet. That's what the news said. Course it did. Butcher leaned back, studying Izuku with new interest. Word inside says a low-tier supe living in that building had an incident 2 nights before. Lost his temper, hurt someone. Minor stuff by Vought's usual standards. Word also says that same supe had started making noise about going public with something he'd seen on set for one of Homelander's little publicity stunts. Something Vought really didn't want getting out. He let that sit. Fired 2 days later. 4 dead, including him. Ruled an accident before the bodies were even cold. Izuku's stomach turned to lead. You're saying Vought. I'm saying I don't have proof, Butcher said flatly, because Vought doesn't leave proof. That's rather the whole point of him. I'm saying it's a pattern I've seen enough times to recognize on sight, same as I'd bet you recognize something wrong about that fire the second you saw it on the telly, or you wouldn't be sitting here asking me about it instead of Ashley Bloody Barrett. He wasn't wrong, and Izuku hated that he wasn't wrong. What do you want from me? Izuku asked directly, because 4 days of careful half-truths had taught him the value of a straight question, even, especially, when the answer might not be one he wanted. Butcher studied him for a long moment, and something in his expression shifted. Not softer exactly, but more genuinely considering. Honestly? Dunno yet, he said. Word's gone round about you. Some kid who dropped out of the sky and caught a fallen supe bare-handed, no cape, no logo, no Vought contract signed yet. Everyone's got a theory. Some reckon you're Vought's newest toy, gonna end up on a billboard within the month, smiling pretty next to Homelander like all the rest of them. Some reckon you're something Vought hasn't figured out how to leash yet, and if that's true, he shrugged, a small economical movement, then I reckon we might have use for each other, eventually. But I'm not in the business of trusting a bloke I met 20 minutes ago on a park bench, and you shouldn't be either. Not me, not Vought, not anybody in this whole rotten city, until they've earned it. That's not much of a pitch, Izuku said, and something in it, the honesty of it, the total absence of Ashley's practiced warmth, made him almost want to smile despite everything. Wasn't meant to be a pitch, Butcher said. Vought's the one selling something. I'm just telling you what's actually happening in this city while you're eating sandwiches 68 floors up. What you do with that's your business. He stood, tucking the folded newspaper under one arm, and for just a moment, something almost gentler crossed his face. The same kind of weary, protective flicker Izuku had seen in Dr. Reyes when she'd almost said something true and stopped herself. For what it's worth, the way you talked to that girl just now, telling her you'd be fine, keeping her from getting in trouble over something that wasn't her fault, that's not something Vought teaches. That's something you brought with you. He nodded once, turning to go. Watch yourself, kid. Vought doesn't let go of something this valuable without a fight, and neither, I expect, will I. But not today. He was gone before Izuku's handler made it back from the car, folded into the ordinary flow of park foot traffic like he'd never been there at all, and Izuku sat alone on the bench for a long moment, replaying every word, weighing a stranger's brutal honesty against 4 days of a corporation's practiced warmth, and finding, uncomfortably, that the stranger's version fit the facts better. Something Vought hasn't figured out how to leash yet. He didn't know yet how right, or how dangerous, that description was about to become. 3 blocks away, in a rooftop garden attached to a luxury high-rise, a woman in a silver and blue supersuit stood at the railing with a headache she couldn't explain, watching the park below through a pair of borrowed binoculars, having heard exactly enough about the new one from a nervous production assistant to want to see him for herself before Vought decided what story to tell about him. Annie January had learned, over several very hard years, that the story Vought told about a new soupe and the truth of that soupe were very rarely the same thing. She watched the boy in the green jacket sit alone on a bench for a long moment after the man in the bomber jacket left, shoulders set in a way that read less like triumph and more like someone carrying a weight he hadn't asked for, and felt something she hadn't expected to feel about a total stranger. Recognition. She lowered the binoculars, turned away from the railing, and went to find out everything Vought was willing to tell her about the boy called Deku, fully expecting, from 4 years of hard experience, that it wouldn't be much, and that whatever it was would only be a fraction of the truth. The summons to meet Homelander came the next morning, delivered not by Ashley but by a curt internal memo projected onto the screen in Izuku's suite the moment he woke. The 7, team introduction, 10 a.m., 99th floor, with no room negotiated in the wording at all. Ashley met him at the elevator, visibly more nervous than Izuku had seen her in 5 days, smoothing invisible wrinkles from her blazer with quick, repetitive motions. "Okay," she said, as the elevator climbed. "Couple of things. When you meet him, Homelander, just be normal, be nice. Compliment the 7. If it comes up, everyone loves hearing how the public sees them. Don't bring up anything that happened yesterday in the park. We know about the park. Don't worry about that right now. Just normal. Friendly. Can you do friendly?" "I'm always friendly," Izuku said, which was true, and didn't seem to reassure Ashley at all. The 99th floor opened onto a space that felt less like an office and more like a stage. Vaulted ceilings, a wall of glass framing the city like a backdrop, 7 names etched in gold along one wall beneath individual portraits rendered in the same glossy, heroic style as the billboard Izuku had seen his first day. And standing in the center of the room, hands clasped loosely behind his back, chin lifted at an angle clearly calibrated for maximum photogenic effect even with no cameras present, was the man from the poster. He was, Izuku thought immediately, exactly as handsome as the billboard promised, and somehow far more unsettling in person, not because of anything overt, but because of the particular quality of his stillness, a predator's patience dressed in a hero's smile. "There he is," Homelander said, and his voice carried the easy, practiced warmth of someone who'd said "there he is" to 1,000 new arrivals, and meant it precisely none of the times. "The mystery man. I've heard a lot about you." He extended a hand, and Izuku shook it, and the grip was exactly, precisely calibrated to communicate strength without applying any. A handshake as a demonstration, not a greeting. "Thank you for meeting me," Izuku said, keeping his voice level, doing the thing that had once made even Endeavor's scowl soften a degree. Steady, respectful, unafraid without being defiant. "I've heard a lot about you too. I bet you have." Homelander's smile widened by a precise, practiced fraction. "Ashley tells me you caught A-Train's little cousin out of the sky your first day here. Bare-handed, no suit, no branding, nothing. That true?" "It's true. That's..." Homelander tilted his head, studying Izuku with an attention that felt uncomfortably like being scanned. "That's genuinely impressive. Do you know how many people in this country could do that? 0. Before you. I've done the math." A beat, casual as a knife, slipped between ribs. "So what I'm curious about, Deku, can I call you Deku, is what a guy who can do that is doing letting Vaught's PR department walk him around like a show pony for a week, instead of showing everyone exactly what he's got." It was, Izuku understood immediately, a test disguised as a compliment. The same kind of test he'd seen All Might and Aizawa run on first years 100 times, except stripped of every ounce of the care that had made those tests feel like guidance instead of a blade held to the throat. "I don't know this world yet," Izuku said honestly. "Where I'm from, showing off power without understanding the consequences gets people hurt. I'd rather understand what I'm walking into before I do anything that can't be taken back." Something flickered behind Homelander's eyes. Not quite disappointment, not quite respect. Something colder and more calculating than either. "Careful," he said, like he was tasting the word. "That's a very careful answer. For a guy who apparently didn't hesitate for 1 second before catching a falling soupe out of the sky. Which is it, Deku? Careful or reckless? Because from where I'm standing, those don't usually come in the same package." "Both, maybe," Izuku said, and found, to his own surprise, that he meant it. "I don't hesitate when someone's in danger. I think very hard about everything else." For a long moment, Homelander said nothing at all, and the stillness stretched, and Izuku understood, with the particular clarity that had once let him read the exact moment a villain's patience ran out, that he was being weighed on some private, unknowable scale, and that the outcome of that weighing mattered more than anything he'd say in the next several seconds. Then Homelander smiled, wide and warm and utterly unreadable. "I like that," he said. "I like that a lot, actually. You know what the problem with this team is, Deku?" He gestured vaguely at the gold-lettered names on the wall, at an unseen roster of colleagues who weren't in the room. "Everyone's got an agenda. Everyone's angling for something. More screen time, a bigger contract, a better spot in the movie. Nobody just shows up, does the job because it's the job." He stepped closer, close enough that Izuku had to actively resist the instinct to give ground, close enough to feel the specific, unnatural stillness of a man who never needed to breathe the way ordinary people did. "You seem like a guy who just shows up. I respect that. I don't respect a lot of things, but I respect that." "Thank you," Izuku said carefully, because it seemed like the moment required something, and because he genuinely didn't know yet whether he'd just passed the test or failed a different one entirely. "Here's what I'm gonna do," Homelander said, stepping back, and just like that the warmth came flooding back into his voice, like a switch thrown, easy and bright. "I'm gonna tell Stan personally that I think you should join the team. Officially. Full 7-member, full backing, full support. Everything Vought's got, behind you. You want to find a way home? We've got resources nobody else in this country has. You want to actually help people, the real way, not the PR version? I can make that happen too. All you gotta do is say yes." It was, Izuku understood immediately, the single largest offer anyone had made him in 5 days. Full resources, full backing, everything wrapped in the specific, unsettling warmth of a man who had just spent 5 minutes testing him for exactly this response. And underneath the offer, unmistakable even through the practiced charm, was the same thing Izuku had felt in Stan Edgar's office. "This is not a request. This is an invitation. You decline at your own risk. Can I think about it?" Izuku asked. The warmth in Homelander's expression didn't waver even a fraction, and that, more than anything, told Izuku exactly how dangerous the answer might have been if he'd read the moment wrong. "Of course," Homelander said easily. "Take your time. Not too much time, though." He clapped a hand on Izuku's shoulder, light, friendly, and Izuku felt, unmistakably, the barely restrained strength underneath it. A demonstration disguised as a gesture of camaraderie. "Welcome to the building, Deku. I've got a good feeling about you." He turned and walked away, cape settling with theatrical precision, and Izuku stood alone in the vaulted, gold-lettered room and let himself, finally, exhale a breath he hadn't realized he'd been holding for the entire conversation. He never once raised his voice, Izuku thought, replaying it. He never once threatened me directly. And I have never in 2 years of fighting actual villains felt that afraid standing in a room with someone. Ashley was waiting by the elevator, practically vibrating with anxious energy. "How'd it go? What'd he say? Did he?" "He offered me a spot on the team," Izuku said quietly. "Full 7 membership." Ashley's face went through several rapid transformations, relief, excitement, and underneath both, something that looked almost like fear on Izuku's behalf. "Okay," she said slowly. "Okay. That's huge, Deku. That's genuinely huge. Most soups wait years for a shot like that. Some never get it at all. What happens to people who say no to Homelander?" Izuku asked. The question landed exactly the way he'd intended it to. Direct, unavoidable, impossible to deflect with a sales pitch. And Ashley's face did something complicated, torn between 5 days of practiced loyalty and something rawer underneath it. "Deku," she said quietly, glancing toward the hallway, toward the cameras Izuku now understood were mounted in every corner of every room in this building. "I really think we should talk about this somewhere else." Which was, Izuku understood, its own kind of answer. He didn't say yes that day. He didn't say no either. He rode the elevator back down to his suite with Homelander's easy warmth and Butcher's brutal honesty sitting side by side in his chest like two stones he couldn't set down, and understood, with growing and uncomfortable clarity, that he had arrived in a world that didn't actually have a neutral option, only a growing list of people deciding, on his behalf and without asking, exactly which side he was already on. Somewhere on the 99th floor, alone in his private office, Homelander watched a replay of the conversation on a security monitor no one else had access to, studying the moment Izuku had asked to think about it, over and over, with the patient, unblinking attention of a predator recalculating exactly how much of a threat something new might eventually become, and exactly how quickly it might need to be dealt with, if it decided wrong. He didn't decide right away. That, more than anything, was what unsettled Vought. 3 days passed in a strange, suspended quiet, Ashley's pitches growing subtly more insistent, Dr. Reyes's consultations growing subtly more careful, as though someone above her had told her to stop being interesting and start being useful. Izuku noticed the tightening. He noticed the 2 new security personnel stationed outside his suite door, introduced as an escort upgrade that nobody had asked for. He noticed, most of all, that nobody at Vought had mentioned Riverside Heights again, not once, as though the subject had been quietly filed somewhere he wasn't meant to find it. On the 4th day, he made a decision that had nothing to do with joining the 7 and everything to do with the question underneath it. "I want to see Riverside Heights," he told Ashley, over what had become their standing morning coffee, in person. Not the news footage, the actual site. Ashley's cup paused halfway to her mouth. I don't think that's really necessary, Deku. It's a closed investigation. There's nothing to—" "I want to see it," Izuku said again, quiet and immovable, the same tone he'd once used telling Aizawa-sensei he wasn't quitting the hero course, no matter what the sports festival had cost him. "You can send someone with me. You can film it, put it in a press release. I genuinely don't care. But I'm going to see it. Today, one way or another. I'd rather you help me than make me find my own way there." It was, he understood even as he said it, the first time in 9 days he'd given Vought an ultimatum instead of accepting one, and he watched Ashley register the shift with visible unease. She made a call. 20 minutes later, they were in a car headed east, toward a part of the city Izuku hadn't yet been shown, with a driver who kept glancing at them in the rearview mirror like he expected to be given different instructions at any moment. Riverside Heights, when they arrived, was worse than the 90-second segment had prepared him for. The building's east wing was a blackened, hollowed ruin, cordoned off behind sagging construction fencing that had clearly been up longer than anyone intended to fix what was behind it. There were no flowers, no makeshift memorial, none of the small human markers Izuku had seen outside tragedy sites back home, just scorched concrete, and a single faded missing poster zip-tied to the fence, curling at the edges from weeks of weather. A photo of a young man with a shy smile that Izuku suspected nobody at Vought had ever bothered to identify by name in any official statement. He stood at the fence for a long time. Ashley hovered a few feet back, uncharacteristically silent. "His name," Izuku said finally, nodding at the poster. "Was he ever named? In any of the reports?" "I don't know," Ashley admitted, and for once there was no polish on it at all. "I can find out. Please do." Izuku's voice was quiet and steady, and carried a weight Ashley hadn't heard from him before. Whatever happened here, whatever Vought decided this was worth covering up, that man had a name. The people who died with him had names. I want them said, publicly, if I have to be the one who says them. Deku, that's really not something I can promise you. I'm not asking you to promise, Izuku said. I'm telling you what I'm going to do. He turned from the fence, and something in his posture, the particular quiet certainty he'd learned from watching All Might stand between danger and the people who couldn't protect themselves, made even the driver watching from the car sit up a little straighter. That evening, he did exactly what he said he would. There was no press conference, no camera crew, nothing orchestrated. He simply walked out of Vought Tower's main lobby at 7 in the evening, past a security detail too surprised to intercept him in time, and found the small cluster of reporters who staked out the building's entrance most evenings hoping for exactly this kind of accident. He gave them 4 names, the 4 who had died in Riverside Heights, names Dr. Reyes had quietly, at real personal risk, pulled for him that afternoon and slipped to him with a folded note and no eye contact. And he said, simply, into 3 shaky phone cameras and 1 professional lens, that whatever the official cause of that fire had been, those 4 people deserved to be named and remembered, not buried under 90 seconds and a weather report. He didn't accuse Vought of anything. He didn't have to. The contrast alone did the work. A boy who'd been housed and fed and courted by the largest company in the country, standing on its own front steps, insisting that 4 dead strangers mattered more than the story that had erased them. By midnight, it was everywhere. Stan Edgar's office at 7 the next morning had none of its usual stillness. Ashley stood near the door, visibly braced for impact. Izuku sat across the desk, unflinching, having expected exactly this summons and having decided, somewhere over the course of a sleepless night, exactly how he intended to meet it. That was, Stan said, with the particular precision of a man choosing every word to avoid saying something he'd regret. An unauthorized public statement, made without clearance, using information obtained through channels I will be investigating thoroughly. I want to be clear that I understand the impulse behind it. I do not, however, appreciate being made to look reactive rather than in control. I told Ashley I intended to help people, Izuku said. Naming the dead is helping people. It's the least I could do, given how little else I understood about what actually happened to them. You understand nothing about what happened to them, Stan said, and for the first time since Izuku had met him, there was a genuine edge underneath the calm. You understand a rumor, passed to you by staff who violated confidentiality agreements to do it, and you turned that rumor into a public spectacle that has cost this company real, measurable value in less than 12 hours. Do you have any idea what a stock movement like that means for the thousands of people this company employs? For the soups under contract whose livelihoods depend on Vought's stability? Do you have any idea what 4 people's names being erased means? Izuku said, and his voice didn't rise, didn't waver, simply held, steady and immovable, the exact register he'd once used, standing over a beaten villain who'd hurt someone smaller than themselves. You told me, the first day I met you, that you'd be curious what I was selected for. I think I might finally understand the answer. Where I'm from, a hero's whole purpose is standing between people and the things that would erase them. Villains, disasters, or the people with enough power and money to decide certain deaths simply don't matter enough to name. I didn't come to this world to be a billboard, Mr. Edgar. I came here by accident, and I intend to leave it better than I found it, whether that fits your quarterly numbers or not. The silence that followed was long enough that Ashley visibly stopped breathing. Stan Edgar studied him for a long moment, something recalculating behind his composed features. Not anger, Izuku realized with some surprise, but something closer to genuine reassessment. A man updating a model that had just proven more complicated than his original data suggested. That, Stan said finally, is either the most naive thing I've heard in 30 years running this company, or it's the single most dangerous thing to walk through those doors in a decade. I confess I haven't decided which. He folded his hands. Here is what happens now, Mr. Midoriya. You will not be disciplined for last night. That would only compound the narrative damage. You will, instead, be managed more carefully going forward, which I suspect you will resent, and which I no longer have the luxury of caring whether you resent. And you will understand, clearly, that what you did last night was not an act without cost. Someone leaked you those names. I intend to find out who. Izuku's stomach tightened, but he kept his face level. I won't tell you who. I didn't ask you to. Stan's voice was almost gentle, which was somehow more unsettling than if it had been sharp. I have other ways of finding out. I always do. He rose, signaling the meeting's end with the same unhurried precision as their first conversation. You've made your choice today, whether you understood it as one or not. You are no longer a quiet variable this company can house and study at leisure. You're a public complication, with a public voice, and a demonstrated willingness to use it against this company's interests. That changes what you're worth to me, Mr. Midoriya. I'd advise you to consider carefully what it might change about what you're worth to Homelander. He left the room without waiting for a response, and Izuku sat alone with Ashley for a long, silent moment, the weight of the warning settling slowly into his chest. You should be careful, Ashley said quietly into the silence. I mean that as a friend, not as Vought's mouthpiece. Whatever's coming next, it's not going to be gentle. She was right. Neither of them yet knew exactly how right. 3 floors below, in a lab Izuku hadn't been shown, Dr. Reyes was already being escorted out of the building by 2 members of Vought's internal security. Her badge deactivated before she'd cleared the lobby. A folder of her research quietly reassigned to someone with fewer scruples about what questions not to ask. And 99 floors up, Homelander stood at his office window, watching the morning traffic crawl 12 stories below, replaying a clip of Izuku's impromptu press statement for the 4th time, the easy warmth entirely absent from his face now, calculating, patiently, precisely, exactly how much longer this new variable could be allowed to remain unpredictable before it became something that needed to be handled a very different way. Dr. Reyes was gone by the time Izuku learned what had happened to her, and the knowing came the way most true things came to him now, sideways, half-confirmed, delivered by someone who had to weigh the cost of telling him against the cost of staying silent. It was Ashley who told him, 3 days after the confrontation in Stan's office, in a voice stripped of its usual polish. She's not coming back, Ashley said, not meeting his eyes, straightening papers on her desk that didn't need straightening. Officially, it's a lateral transfer, research restructuring, off the record. A glance toward the door, toward the cameras. She asked too many questions after your press thing. Vought doesn't fire people for that. It just makes the questions someone else's job to not answer. Izuku sat with that for a long time after Ashley left the room, the guilt settling in his chest like a stone he hadn't asked to carry. Dr. Reyes had given him 4 names, quietly, at real cost, because she'd believed, even for a moment, that naming the dead mattered more than her own safety inside a machine built to make exactly that kind of belief expensive. And the machine had responded exactly the way machines like it always did, not with punishment loud enough to look like retaliation, just a quiet erasure, filed under restructuring, buried the same way Riverside Heights had been buried. This is what it costs, he thought. Every time, somebody pays for the truth, and it's never the people who buried it. He found her that afternoon, or rather Ashley, guilt-ridden, cautious, clearly deciding this was one line she was willing to cross, quietly passed him an address instead of finding her herself, a coffee shop 3 blocks outside Vaught's usual radius, and told him, in a voice barely above a whisper, that if he went alone, without a Vought escort, without telling anyone where he was going, he might get there before anyone thought to stop him. He went. Dr. Reyes looked smaller outside her lab coat, sitting in a corner booth with a coffee gone cold in front of her, dark circles under her eyes that hadn't been there a week ago. She startled when Izuku slid into the seat across from her, then settled, some of the tension leaving her shoulders. Relief, Izuku realized, that it was him, and not someone sent to make sure her silence held. You shouldn't be here, she said. If anyone from Vought sees you, I don't care, Izuku said. I came to say I'm sorry. This is my fault. I asked you a question I had no right to ask, knowing what it might cost you, and I asked it anyway because I wanted the truth more than I wanted you to be safe. That was selfish. I should have thought that through better. Something in Dr. Reyes's face shifted, surprise, and underneath it, something that looked almost like the first real warmth he'd seen from anyone at Vought since Ashley's practice smile on day one. You're the first person in that entire building who's ever apologized to me for anything, she said quietly. Do you know that? 5 years I worked there. Not once. She wrapped both hands around her cold coffee, not drinking it, just holding it. I don't regret giving you those names, for what it's worth. I regret a lot of things about working for that company. That's not one of them. What will you do now? I don't know yet. A humorless, tired smile. Vought doesn't technically own me. I'm not under a soup contract. I'm just staff, so there's no legal leash. But try getting hired at any research lab in this city after Vought quietly tells people you're difficult. That's the actual punishment, not the firing. The years after it, Izuku sat with that. The particular, patient cruelty of it. No dramatic retaliation, just a slow closing of every door, administered by a company powerful enough to make blacklisting look like coincidence. I want to do something about this, he said finally. Not just for you, for everyone this happens to. But I don't know what that looks like yet. In a world where the people with the most power are the ones doing it. Dr. Reyes studied him for a long moment. There's a man, she said slowly, like she was deciding whether to say it even as the words left her mouth. Goes by Butcher. I've heard things. Most of it bad, some of it not. He runs a crew that goes after soups who hurt people and never face it. I don't know if you should trust him. I don't know if anyone should, but if you're looking for people willing to fight this company instead of just surviving it, he's the only name in this city that comes up. I've met him, Izuku said. He found me first. Of course he did. Something almost like a laugh, tired and real. Word travels fast in the underground, faster than it does at the tower. Be careful, Izuku. Whatever you decide, whoever you decide to trust, this city eats people who think they can fix it single-handed. It's been eating them for decades. I've watched it happen more times than I can count. They talked for another hour, not about Vought mostly, but about home, about One for All, about the strange, quiet comfort of being genuinely listened to by someone who wanted nothing from him. And when Izuku finally left, walking back toward Vought Tower under a sky gone orange with sunset, he carried with him a decision that had been forming, slowly, since the moment he'd read those 4 names off a curling missing poster. I can't fix this from inside a building that profits from burying it. Whatever I choose to do here, it has to happen on my terms, not theirs. He didn't get the chance to act on it right away. Vought moved first, and it moved with the specific, practiced efficiency of a machine that had learned, over decades, exactly how to turn a liability back into an asset without ever admitting it had been a liability at all. The email hit every entertainment outlet in the city within 48 hours. Vought International announces Riverside Heights Memorial Fund, honoring victims named by emerging hero, Deku. A press release followed, full of warm, careful language about accountability and community, and Vaught's deep commitment to the families affected, alongside a photo, taken without Izuku's knowledge or consent, from a Vought Tower security camera the day he'd stood at the Riverside Heights fence, cropped and color-graded to look heroic, soulful, exactly the image a marketing team would have paid a fortune to stage on purpose. Izuku learned about it from the television, the same way he'd learned about the fire in the first place, and felt something in his chest go cold and tight watching his own quiet, private grief repackaged into a fundraising campaign with his face on it. They can't do this, he said to Ashley, finding her within the hour, the calm he'd carried out of the coffee shop entirely gone. That photo, nobody asked me. That statement, I never said any of that. Legally they can, Ashley said, and she looked genuinely uncomfortable saying it, which was, Izuku had learned, about as close to an apology as Vaught's machine allowed its employees to give. Your likeness rights are murky since you're not under contract, and Stan's people found a loophole fast enough that I don't think it was improvised. Deku, I'm sorry, I really am, but this is what Stan meant. when he said you'd changed what you were worth to him. You wanted to name the dead publicly. Now they own the naming." Izuku stood very still and understood, with a clarity that felt like ice water, exactly what had just happened to him. His idealism, the purest, simplest thing he'd brought with him from home, the desire to make sure 4 strangers weren't erased, had been taken, without his consent, and turned into exactly the kind of story Vought had wanted to tell about Riverside Heights from the beginning. Not a cover-up exposed, but a tragedy managed, with Vought positioned as the hero of its own crime. "I need to fix this," he said quietly. "You can't," Ashley said, not unkindly, just honest in a way she rarely allowed herself to be. "Not through Vought's channels. Whatever you're going to do about this, Deku, I think it has to happen outside these walls." "I think you already know that." He did. He'd known it since Dr. Reyes's tired, quiet warning in a coffee shop 3 blocks from the tower. That night, for the first time since he'd fallen into this world, Izuku Midoriya didn't return to his Vought-provided suite. He walked instead, alone, into a part of the city he hadn't been shown, toward a cramped apartment above a shuttered laundromat that a source inside Vought's own PR department, guilty, quiet, finally done choosing the company over her conscience, had given him the address for. Billy Butcher opened the door before Izuku had finished knocking, unsurprised, like he'd been expecting exactly this visit for exactly this many days. "Took you longer than I thought," Butcher said, stepping back to let him in. "Come on then, let's talk about what Vought did to your dead friends' names and what you're planning to do about it." The apartment above the shuttered laundromat was nothing like Vought Tower, and Izuku understood within seconds of stepping inside that this was entirely intentional. No glass walls, no curated warmth, just a cramped living room cluttered with case files, a whiteboard covered in photographs and red string that looked like something out of a conspiracy thriller, and the lingering smell of cigarettes and old coffee that Dr. Reyes had warned him about without quite describing. Huey Campbell was on the couch when Izuku walked in, looking up with the specific wariness of someone who'd learned the hard way not to trust anything that walked through that door without warning. A broad-shouldered man Izuku didn't recognize, Mother's Milk, Butcher introduced him a moment later, with the flat efficiency of someone who didn't waste words on pleasantries, stood near the window, arms crossed, watching Izuku with an evaluating stillness that reminded him uncomfortably of Homelander's. "Sit," Butcher said, dropping into a worn armchair and gesturing at the couch. "Talk." Izuku sat and told them, the fire, the leaked names, the coffee shop conversation with Dr. Reyes, the press release that had turned his private grief into a fundraising campaign, wearing his face without his consent. He watched their reactions as he spoke. Huey's grew steadily more disturbed, the specific discomfort of someone who recognized a familiar pattern. Mother's Milk's face gave away almost nothing at all, which Izuku suspected was its own kind of tell. And Butcher just listened, perfectly still, occasionally exhaling smoke through his nose, like a man confirming something he'd already suspected. "That's Vought," Butcher said, once Izuku finished. "That's the whole company in one story, near enough. They don't just cover up what they do wrong. They take the people who try to expose it and turn them into the next campaign. Happen to better people than you, kid, and it'll happen to worse ones after." "I want to stop it," Izuku said. "Not just this one story. The pattern. Everyone wants to stop it," Mother's Milk said, speaking for the first time, voice low and even. "First week, then they see what it actually costs, and most of them quietly stop wanting it quite so bad." He wasn't hostile exactly, just delivering a fact he'd apparently watched prove true more times than he cared to count. "I'm not most people," Izuku said, and there was no bravado in it, just simple, quiet certainty. Butcher studied him for a long moment, cigarette burning down between his fingers. "No," he said finally, "I don't reckon you are. Question is what you're actually willing to do about it. 'Cause here's the thing about fighting Vought, Deku. It's not clean. It's not catching fallen soups out the sky and getting your face on the news for it. Sometimes it's ugly. Sometimes it means making choices your precious hero code back home never had to make. 'Cause the villains you fought didn't own the police, the government, and half the bloody media in the country. What kind of choices? Izuku asked, and something in his voice made even Huey look up sharply. Butcher exhaled a long stream of smoke, studying him. "We're not murderers," he said, which Izuku noted was a careful, specific denial rather than a broad one. "But we've done things that'd make your UA commission choke on its tea, I expect. Broken laws. Hurt people who probably deserved worse than they got. Lied to people we cared about, more times than I like counting. That's the actual cost of fighting something this big, this rich, this untouchable. You in? Or are you still planning on saving the world without ever getting your hands dirty?" It was, Izuku understood, the exact question the whole conversation had been building toward, and he sat with it honestly, the way his mother had taught him to sit with hard things instead of answering them too fast. "I don't know," he said finally, and watched something flicker across Butcher's face. Not disappointment, surprisingly, but something closer to respect. "I believe in doing the right thing even when it's hard. I don't believe the ends justify anything at all, no matter what they buy you. If fighting Vought means becoming the kind of person who thinks like Vought does, that people are just costs to manage, then I don't think I can do that, even if it means losing." "Christ," Mother's Milk said, half a laugh in it. "He's serious." "I'm always serious," Izuku said, and something in the plain, earnest weight of it broke a little of the tension in the room. Butcher leaned forward, elbows on his knees, studying Izuku with an intensity that had shed most of its performative menace. "Here's what I'll offer you then," he said. "Not a recruitment, not yet. I don't trust you enough for that, and you sure as hell don't trust me. Information. We've been building a file on Vought's dirt for years. Cover-ups, black site testing. Dead soups Vought's disappeared when they got inconvenient. Riverside Heights isn't the first, and it won't be the last. I'll show you what we've got, and you decide for yourself what kind of company you're actually working for. No pressure, no strings. Just the truth, since Vought seems awfully keen on keeping that from you." It felt, Izuku thought, like the first genuinely honest offer anyone had made him since he'd arrived in this world. Not because Butcher was trustworthy exactly, but because the offer cost Butcher nothing to make and asked nothing in return, which was rarer in this city than Izuku had realized until just now. "Show me," Izuku said. What followed was 2 hours that reshaped, quietly and permanently, everything Izuku understood about the world he'd fallen into. Butcher spread files across the coffee table, photographs, redacted documents, testimonies from soups who'd fled Vought contracts and lived to regret it less than the ones who'd stayed. A soup named Blue Hawk quietly disappeared after a public relations disaster 3 years prior, officially retired, never seen again by anyone who'd known him. A black site facility upstate where Vought tested experimental compound V variants on subjects who'd never consented to anything, dressed up in consent forms nobody without a law degree could parse. A pattern, going back decades, of Vought weaponizing exactly the kind of PR machine Izuku had spent 9 days trapped inside, not as an occasional cruelty but as the company's fundamental operating principle. By the time Izuku finished reading, something in his chest had gone hard and cold and very, very certain. "This is real," he said quietly. "All of it. Every page," Butcher said, "and that's just what we could prove enough to write down. There's more we know and can't." Izuku sat back, the weight of it settling over him like a physical thing. 9 days ago, he'd fallen into this world with nothing but one for all, and a promise to himself that he'd help people, wherever he landed. He hadn't understood, not really, until this exact moment, sitting in a cramped apartment above a shuttered laundromat, exactly how large the thing he'd have to help people against actually was. "I'm not joining you," he said finally, watching Butcher's face carefully as he said it. "Not yet. Maybe not ever. If what you're asking crosses lines I can't cross. But I'm not going back to Vought's version of things either. I need to see more. I need to understand exactly what I'm dealing with before I decide what I'm willing to do about it." "Fair enough," Butcher said, and there was no anger in it. Just the patient calculation of a man who'd learned that pushing too hard, too fast, tended to break exactly the kind of asset he was trying to build. "Take the files. Think it over. Doors open when you're ready. if you're ever ready." Izuku left an hour later, files tucked carefully into his jacket, walking back through streets that felt different now than they had 9 days ago. Not because the city had changed, but because he finally understood, with painful clarity, exactly what was hiding underneath its gleaming surface. He didn't go back to Vought Tower that night. He found a cheap motel 3 miles from the waterfront, paid cash from the small allowance Vought had given him, and sat awake until nearly dawn reading Butcher's files by lamplight, building, piece by careful piece, a picture of a world that needed exactly the kind of hero he'd trained 2 years to become, and exactly none of the kind Vought was trying to make him into. Somewhere across the city, Ashley Barrett filed a missing persons alert that Vaught's internal security quietly buried within the hour, replacing it instead with a far more useful cover story, that Deku had taken a brief personal leave to process his grief over Riverside Heights, a story the PR department began drafting before Ashley had even finished typing the alert. And on the 99th floor, Homelander stood at his window in the dark, having been informed within minutes of Izuku's absence, weighing, with cold, patient precision, exactly how much longer this variable could be allowed to wander outside the machine's control before it stopped being a complication and became something that had to be ended. Izuku returned to Vought Tower 2 days later, and he did it on his own terms, walking through the front lobby in broad daylight, in full view of the security cameras he now understood recorded everything, rather than sneaking back in through some side entrance like a man who'd done something to be ashamed of. He hadn't. He'd only finally learned the truth of the place he'd been staying, and he intended to make sure everyone in that building understood he now knew it. Ashley met him at the elevator, relief and anger warring visibly across her face. 2 days, she hissed, once the doors closed and they were alone. 2 days, Deku. Do you have any idea what kind of story I had to build to keep security from listing you as a defected asset? Where were you? Learning the truth, Izuku said simply, and something in the flat, unshakable calm of it made Ashley go quiet. The summons to Stan's office came within the hour, and this time, Izuku walked in without waiting to be told to sit, settling into the chair across the desk with a composure that made Stan Edgar's eyes narrow fractionally. A small tell Izuku had learned to read over 9 days, of a man recalculating faster than he wanted to show. 2 days unaccounted for, Stan said. I trust you have an explanation. Blue Hawk, Izuku said, instead of an explanation. The black site facility upstate. The consent forms nobody without a law degree could actually understand. Should I keep going, or does the list get longer than you'd like it to in front of me? The silence that followed was different from every silence that had come before it in this office. Not calculated, not a rhetorical pause designed to unsettle. Genuine. Stan Edgar sat very still, and for the first time since Izuku had met him, something like real alarm moved behind the composed, unhurried mask. I don't know what you think you've learned, Stan said carefully, or from whom, but I'd advise significant caution about which conclusions you draw from documents obtained through Billy Butcher, Izuku said, watching the name land, watching Stan's jaw tighten by a fraction he probably didn't realize was visible. I know who he is. I know what your company calls him. I also know he showed me 2 hours of proof about things this company has done that no press release will ever mention, and none of it was fabricated in a way I couldn't independently verify some of on my own, once I knew where to look. He leaned forward slightly, and for the first time in 9 days, it was Izuku who controlled the room's temperature, not Stan. I came here believing power should be earned by choosing to protect people who can't protect themselves. That's what I was taught. That's what I trained 2 years of my life to become. And I have spent 9 days watching this company do the exact opposite of that, at scale, with a smile on every billboard while it does it. You're young, Stan said, and for the first time, something almost weary crept into his voice. And you're operating from a moral framework built for a world simpler than this one. Every company this size has made compromises you'd find distasteful in isolation. That doesn't make the compromises indefensible in aggregate. Vought protects thousands of soups from a public that would happily see them all locked away or worse. It employs tens of thousands of ordinary people whose livelihoods depend on this company's stability. The choices I make aren't good or evil, Mr. Midoriya. They're arithmetic. 4 dead people in Riverside Heights weren't arithmetic, Izuku said quietly. They were people, and you turned even naming them into a marketing campaign rather than actually reckoning with what happened to them. He stood, and the movement carried a finality that made even Ashley, silent by the door, take an involuntary step back. I'm not signing with the 7. I'm not signing with Vought at all. I appreciate the roof and the food, genuinely, but I won't be a billboard for a company that buries people to protect its stock price. Something shifted in Stan Edgar's expression. Not anger, exactly, but the specific, cold recalibration of a man watching a very expensive asset walk itself out the door. You understand, he said slowly, that refusing Vought's protection doesn't make you neutral. It makes you unaligned, in a city where unaligned soups tend to have short, complicated careers. I would genuinely prefer you as an ally, Mr. Midoriya, however inconvenient your conscience proves. The alternative is considerably less comfortable for everyone involved, myself included. Is that a threat? It's an accurate description of how this world works, Stan said. I don't need to threaten you. The world will do that on its own, the moment you step outside a system built to protect people like you and start operating like an ordinary person with extraordinary power and no institutional cover at all. He paused, and something almost like genuine concern crossed his controlled features. Brief, and gone. I'd advise you reconsider. Not for my benefit, for yours. Izuku held his gaze for a long moment, weighing the warning against everything he now understood about the man delivering it. I appreciate the honesty, he said finally. It's more than I've gotten from most of this building, but my answer doesn't change. He left the office without waiting to be dismissed, and behind him, Stan Edgar sat alone for a long moment, staring at the closed door, before reaching for a private line that connected directly to one office on the 99th floor. He's declined, Stan said once the call connected. Formally and publicly enough that reversing it would cost us credibility. We can't easily rebuild. I'd like your read on next steps before this becomes a liability neither of us can contain. On the other end, Homelander's voice was mild, almost pleasant, in the specific way that had come, over 9 days, to worry Izuku more than any shout ever could have. Let me handle it, Homelander said. I've got a few ideas. The false peace, such as it had ever been, ended 3 days later. Not with an attack, but with something quieter and, in its way, crueler. A segment aired during Vought's flagship evening broadcast, professionally shot, expertly edited, framing Izuku's departure from Vought's campus not as a principled stand, but as the erratic behavior of an unstable, unregistered soupe who had declined institutional support and was now operating outside any oversight, with power levels our top scientists still don't fully understand. Izuku watched it in the motel room he'd been renting with the last of his Vought stipend, and felt something in his chest go tight and cold as the broadcast cut to an interview with a soupe he vaguely recognized, one of the Seven's junior members, expressing concern for public safety, using careful, rehearsed language that painted Izuku as exactly the kind of unpredictable threat Vought's entire business model existed to prevent. They hadn't lied, not technically. They'd simply taken every true thing he'd done and reassembled it into a story that made him the danger instead of the company that had spent 9 days trying to leash him. His phone, a cheap prepaid Ashley had quietly given him before he left, a small act of conscience he suspected she'd regret if Vought ever found out, buzzed with a text from an unknown number that turned out, 3 messages later, to be Butcher. Seen the telly? Told you it wouldn't be clean. I know, Izuku typed back. What happens now? The reply took almost 10 minutes, long enough that Izuku had started pacing the small motel room by the time it came. Now Vought's decided you're a threat instead of an asset. Means they'll come at you different, not sandwiches and pretty offices anymore. You've got a decision to make, kid, and you've got less time to make it than you did a week ago. Come by the flat. We need to talk about what's actually coming for you. Izuku sat on the edge of the motel bed for a long moment, the broadcast still murmuring in the background, his own face on the screen framed in language designed to make ordinary people afraid of him, and understood, with a clarity that settled cold and certain in his chest, that whatever peace he'd imagined existed between himself and Vought had never really existed at all, only a runway, carefully measured, that had just run out. He grabbed his jacket. He left the key on the nightstand, and for the first time since falling into this world, Izuku Midoriya walked out into a city that had just publicly decided he was dangerous, with nothing left to protect him but exactly what he'd brought from home, and whatever he chose, in the days ahead, to become. The man was waiting outside Butcher's building when Izuku arrived, and everything about him, the neutral gray suit, the government issue watch, the specific, unhurried patience of someone accustomed to being obeyed rather than argued with, told Izuku immediately that this wasn't part of Vought's machine at all. This was something else. "Mr. Midoriya," the man said, stepping away from an unmarked black sedan parked at the curb, hands visible, posture deliberately non-threatening in a way that felt, to Izuku's trained instincts, more calculated than reassuring. "Agent Marcus Cole, CIA Soup Threat Assessment Division. I'd appreciate 5 minutes before you go inside." "You know Butcher?" Izuku said, cataloging fast. The sedan's government plates, the earpiece the man wasn't quite hiding, the fact that he'd known exactly where and when to intercept him. "I know a lot of people in this city," Cole said, with the thin, professional smile of someone who'd said some version of that sentence 1,000 times. "I know Vought put out a broadcast 3 hours ago painting you as an unregistered threat. I know Butcher's about to offer you a seat at his table. And I know both of them are going to tell you a version of the truth that happens to serve their own interests." He gestured toward the sedan. "I'd like to offer you a third option. 5 minutes. That's all I'm asking." Izuku hesitated, weighing it. Everything about the last 10 days had taught him that no offer in this city came free. But he'd also learned, the hard way, that refusing information out of caution had cost him more than accepting it carefully ever had. 5 minutes, he agreed. They didn't get in the car. Cole leaned against it instead, arms crossed, and spoke with the flat, unembellished cadence of a man who'd learned that plain facts landed harder than performed urgency ever could. "The government's known about you for 8 days, Cole said. "Vaught's required by federal contract to report anomalous power readings above a certain threshold. Yours broke the scale they used to measure it. That got flagged all the way up, past people who care about PR, to people who care about exactly one thing: whether an asset like you represents a national security variable we can predict, or one we can't. He let that settle. Right now, you're the second kind. That makes you the single most urgent Supe-related problem in this country. More urgent than Homelander, because at least we understand what Homelander's capable of and what keeps him in line. Nobody understands what keeps you in line yet. That's not an insult. That's a genuine, serious problem, from where I sit. What is it you actually want?" Izuku asked directly. "Cooperation," Cole said. "Not Vaught's kind. No contracts, no branding, no billboards. A working relationship where the government understands your capabilities and intentions well enough to trust you're not a threat, and in exchange, you get something neither Vought nor Butcher can offer: legal standing. Documentation, a path to citizenship if you end up stuck in this world permanently, and federal protection from exactly the kind of manufactured PR threat Vought aired tonight." He paused. "I'll be honest with you, because I think you respond better to honesty than to pitches, and God knows you've had enough pitches this week. We also want to understand your power, thoroughly, because if there's a version of Compound V that produces something like what you've got, or a way to replicate what you are without it, that changes calculations for this country that go a lot higher than my pay grade." There it was, the same shape Izuku had seen twice already this week, dressed in a different suit, help wrapped around use. He'd begun to recognize the pattern well enough to stop being surprised by it, though it still landed with a familiar, tired weight. "You want to study me too," Izuku said, "just with better paperwork than Vaught's." Cole didn't flinch from it. "Yes," he said simply. "I'm not going to pretend otherwise, because you'd see through it in about a day, and then you'd trust me less than you trust Vought, which would be a genuinely remarkable achievement on my part. I'm telling you plainly, the government wants to understand you. What I'm offering is that we do it with your consent, with documented protections, and without turning your grief over 4 dead strangers into a fundraising campaign. A pause, more pointed than the rest. I saw that broadcast too. For what it's worth, most people in my building found it as ugly as you clearly did. Izuku said nothing for a long moment, weighing it, a third option, genuinely different in shape from the first two, and yet fundamentally, underneath the different packaging, asking for the same thing everyone in this city seemed to want from him, a piece of what he was, in exchange for a promise of safety he had no way yet to verify. Why are you telling me all this on a street corner instead of dragging me into a facility somewhere? Izuku asked. You clearly have the resources. Something that might have been genuine respect flickered across Cole's professional mask. Because forcibly containing a soupe with power readings that broke our instruments is a spectacularly bad idea. And because I've read the last 10 days of your file closely enough to know you respond to respect, not coercion. Vought made that mistake. I'd rather not repeat it. He straightened off the car, producing a card and holding it out. Plain government issue, nothing but a phone number on it. Think it over. Talk to Butcher, if that's still the plan for tonight. I'd genuinely like to hear what he says about me. It's usually entertaining. But know that as of tonight, you're not choosing between Vought and the boys anymore, Mr. Midoriya. There's a third party in this now, and we've got resources neither of them can match, for better or worse. He got in the sedan and drove off before Izuku could ask another question, leaving him standing on the sidewalk with a plain white card in his hand, and the growing uncomfortable certainty that whatever careful balance he'd imagined navigating between two factions had just become considerably more complicated. Butcher's reaction, when Izuku showed him the card 20 minutes later, was immediate and sharp. Cole, Butcher said, flat and cold, all trace of his earlier warmth gone. Should have known they'd sniff you out eventually, but Christ, that was fast even for them. He turned the card over in his fingers like it might be contaminated. You know what these people do? When cooperation doesn't pan out the way they hoped? I've got a list. Longer than Vought's, if you can believe that. Just quieter about it. Government black budgets don't answer to shareholders. That makes them worse, not better, whatever nice suit they send to make the pitch. He was honest about what he wanted, Izuku said carefully. More honest than Vought's been with me from day one. Honest and good aren't the same thing, Butcher said. Man tells you straight to your face he wants to study you and lock you into a program you can't leave, and you call that a point in his favor? That's not honesty, kid. That's just confidence he doesn't need to lie, 'cause he reckons you don't have anywhere else to go. He tossed the card onto the coffee table, next to the sprawl of files from 2 nights before. Here's the truth of where you're standing now, and I'll say it plain since apparently plain's the flavor of the week. Vought wants you as a product. The government wants you as an asset. And I want... He paused, and for once, something almost uncertain crossed his weathered face. I want you as a weapon against the thing that's hurt more people in this city than anyone else combined. None of us are offering you a version of just be yourself and help people, 'cause that's not how power works in this world, and never has been. Question you've got to answer, and soon, is which version of being used you can actually live with. It was, Izuku thought, the most honest thing anyone had said to him since he'd fallen through the rift 10 days ago. Brutal, unflattering, and true in a way that cut through every careful pitch he'd been offered since. None of them, Izuku said quietly. That's the answer. I don't want to be Vought's product, or the government's asset, or your weapon. I want to help people because it's right, not because it serves someone else's interests on top of it. Butcher studied him for a long, unreadable moment. Good luck holding on to that, he said finally, not unkindly. This city's real good at making that particular position untenable. But I'll say this much for you. You're the first person who's walked through Vought's front door and mine both and come out the other side still sounding like that. Means something, even if I'm not sure yet what. Outside, the city moved on, indifferent, unaware that 3 separate powerful factions had just quietly converged on a single boy from another world, each one certain, in its own way, that he belonged to them. and none of them yet understanding that the version of Izuku Midoriya who'd walked out of Vought Tower 2 days ago had already decided, with quiet and immovable certainty, that he belonged to no one at all. The offer Butcher had been circling for 2 weeks finally arrived on a night thick with rain, delivered not with ceremony but with the same blunt, unadorned honesty he'd offered everything else. They were alone in the apartment, Huey and Mother's Milk out on some errand Butcher hadn't explained, and Butcher had poured 2 glasses of something dark and cheap, sliding one across the coffee table toward Izuku without asking if he wanted it. "Gonna tell you something I don't tell most people," Butcher said, settling into his armchair, rain ticking steadily against the window behind him. "Why I do this. Why I've spent years of my life making myself an enemy of the most powerful company in the country, when I could have taken any number of easier paths that didn't end with a target on my back." Izuku said nothing, recognizing the particular quality of silence a story like this required. "Had a wife," Butcher said, voice flattening into something carefully controlled, the tone of a man who'd told this story enough times to have worn the rawest edges off it, though clearly not all of them. "Homelander took her from me. Not in the way you'd think. Not clean. Not something I can point to and say there, that's the crime. Arrest him for that. Vaught's smart enough that it never leaves proof. But he took her, same as he's taken things from plenty of people in this city, and there was not one single consequence for it. Not a headline, not a hearing, nothing. Just a company powerful enough to make an entire human life disappear from the story, same as they tried to do with your 4 names in Riverside Heights." He drank, set the glass down harder than necessary. "So don't mistake what I'm about to offer you for something clean, or noble, or built on the kind of code you brought with you from home. I hate that man more than I've ever hated anything, and I've built my whole life around making him pay for it, whatever that costs, whoever it costs." "That's not a pitch," Izuku said quietly. "That's a warning. Both," Butcher said. "Here's the actual offer, since you've earned a straight one by now. Join us, not as Vaught's asset, not as the government's project, as something that's actually mine to direct, against the actual source of everything you've spent 2 weeks watching this city bury. I'll teach you where the real rot is. I'll give you targets Vought spent decades making sure nobody could touch, and in exchange, I need to know you're willing to do what it actually takes to bring something like Homelander down. Not the pretty version, not the UA Commission version, the real one." "What does the real version look like?" Izuku asked, and he asked it steadily, because he'd learned, over 2 weeks, that flinching from a hard question in this city only bought him a softer lie in its place. Butcher held his gaze for a long moment. "Sometimes it looks like letting someone get hurt you could have saved, 'cause saving them would have blown a job that saves 50 people down the line," he said. "Sometimes it looks like using information you got by breaking someone's trust. Sometimes," his jaw tightened, and for the first time, Izuku saw something genuinely uncertain move behind Butcher's flat, weathered eyes. "Sometimes it looks like deciding a monster's gotta die. The world you're living in doesn't have a courtroom that'll ever hold him accountable any other way. That's the real version, Deku. Not clean, not fair, just the only thing that's ever actually worked against something this size." Izuku sat with it for a long time, the rain ticking steadily against the glass, the weight of the question settling into every part of him that had spent 2 years training to become exactly the kind of hero this offer asked him not to be. "I can't," he said finally, and watched something flicker across Butcher's face. Not quite surprise, more like a confirmation of something he'd already half expected. "Not the way you're describing it. I believe people can become monsters, and I believe some of them may never be talked back from that. But the moment I decide a life doesn't matter enough to save, or that breaking someone's trust is just a cost of doing business, I've already lost the thing I actually came here to protect. I've become exactly the kind of person who thinks people are costs to manage. Same as Vought. Same as Stan Edgar's arithmetic." He met Butcher's eyes, steady and unflinching. "I won't do that. Not even against Homelander. Not even for you." The silence that followed was long and heavy, and Izuku half expected it to end in anger. The specific, cold anger of a man who'd offered his most honest truth and had it refused. Instead, Butcher exhaled, long and slow, and something that looked almost like relief crossed his tired face. "Good," he said quietly. Izuku blinked. "Good? You think I wanted you to say yes?" Butcher said, and there was something raw underneath the gruffness now, something Izuku hadn't heard from him before. "I've watched what this fight does to people who say yes to that version of it, kid. Watched it hollow out better men than me. I've become something I'm not proud of, more times than I can count, doing what I told you the real version looks like. Part of me's been hoping, this whole conversation, that you'd tell me no. That there's still one person walking around this godforsaken city who hasn't had to become what I've become to survive it." He picked his glass back up, drained it. "Doesn't mean I'll stop fighting Homelander. Doesn't mean I don't still need you, in whatever form you're willing to give it. But I'm not going to be the one who talks you into becoming something you'd hate yourself for. World's got enough people doing that already." It was, Izuku understood, the single most honest moment he'd shared with anyone since falling into this world. Not a pitch, not a test, not a careful calculation of what he was worth to someone else's cause. Just two people, exhausted by very different versions of the same fight, finding a strange, unexpected common ground in the refusal itself. "I still want to help you," Izuku said, "just not that way. There has to be a version of this that doesn't require becoming the thing we're fighting." "Maybe," Butcher said, and for the first time, it didn't sound entirely like disbelief. "Maybe you're the one who finds it. God knows the rest of us haven't managed it yet." He set the empty glass down, and something in his posture shifted. Business returning, though gentler than before. "Here's what I can offer you then, without asking you to cross any lines. Information. Backup, when it counts, on terms we both agree to beforehand. And when the real fight comes, and it's coming, Deku, faster than either of us would like, I want you standing next to us, not against us, and not off somewhere trying to save everyone clean, while the rest of us do the ugly work you won't." "I can agree to that," Izuku said. They shook on it. A real handshake, nothing like Homelander's calibrated performance of strength, just two tired allies agreeing to fight the same war from different, uneasy angles. Izuku left the apartment near midnight, rain still falling steady over the city, and found, waiting under the awning across the street, a figure he hadn't expected, a woman in civilian clothes, blonde hair damp from the rain, watching him with an expression that held more recognition than a stranger's should. "You're Deku," she said. "Not a question." "I am. And you're Annie," she said. "Starlight, when I'm working. I've been trying to find a way to talk to you for 2 weeks that didn't run through Vought's security detail." She glanced toward Butcher's building, then back at him, something careful and searching in her expression. "I saw the broadcast. I know what they did with your face and your grief. I wanted you to know. Not everyone inside that building agrees with it. Some of us have been trying to change what Vought is from the inside for years. It's slow. It's exhausting. Most days it feels impossible." She met his eyes, steady despite the rain running down her face. "But I don't think Butcher's way is the only other option either. I've watched what it costs the people who choose it. I think there might be a third way. And I think you might be the first person to arrive in this city with a real chance of finding it." Izuku stood in the rain, looking at a woman offering him yet another version of the same impossible choice he'd been navigating for 2 weeks. Vought's machine, Butcher's war, and now, something in between, fragile and uncertain and maybe, just maybe, genuinely different. "I'd like to hear more," he said. Annie's answering smile was small and tired and entirely real. "Then let's get out of the rain," she said, "and I'll tell you everything I've been too afraid to say inside those walls." Neither of them noticed the black sedan idling 2 blocks down, Agent Cole watching through the rain-streaked windshield with quiet, patient interest, already reaching for his phone to update a file that had just become considerably more complicated. Nor the figure far above the city, on the 99th floor of Vought Tower, watching a live feed from a drone Vought's security division had quietly deployed the moment Izuku left the tower 2 weeks ago. Homelander's expression flat and unreadable as he watched the boy who'd refused every offer made to him finally, choose someone to stand beside. Time to stop waiting, Homelander thought. and reached for his own phone. The strike came at dawn, and it came for Annie first. Izuku learned about it from Ashley, of all people, calling the burner phone he'd been using for 2 weeks, her voice tight and fast in a way that told him she was breaking real rules to make the call at all. "Starlight's been pulled into an emergency 7 meeting," she said. "No preamble, no pleasantries. Not a request, Deku. A pull. Security escort. The kind reserved for people who've done something Homelanders decided not to forgive. I don't know what she told you last night, but if it's what I think it is, you need to move. Now." Izuku was already moving before the call ended, cutting across the city through streets slick with the last of the night's rain, One for All humming under his skin with the particular readiness that came before a fight he already knew was inevitable. He'd spent 2 weeks being careful, being patient, weighing every choice against a code he refused to compromise, and he understood, with sudden and total clarity, that patience had just run out on someone else's timeline, not his own. He reached Vought Tower's private garage entrance, the one Annie had shown him the night before, murmuring half-formed plans for a meeting that clearly wasn't supposed to happen this soon. Just as a black SUV pulled through the gate ahead of him, and through the tinted glass, for one brief, unmistakable second, he saw her face. Not afraid, exactly. Annie January had the particular set jaw of someone who'd faced this exact moment in her nightmares for years and had run out of ways to avoid it finally arriving. Izuku didn't think. He moved. Full speed, full strength. The kind of unrestrained commitment he'd held carefully in check for 2 entire weeks inside a world that hadn't yet seen what he was actually capable of, and put himself directly in the SUV's path, one raised hand closing around the reinforced grille, with enough force to stop 2 tons of armored vehicle dead in the middle of the street, tires screaming, metal groaning under his grip. The door opened. Homelander stepped out, unhurried, cape settling with the same theatrical precision as their first meeting, and this time there was no warmth in his expression at all, just cold, patient calculation, and underneath it, something that might have been genuine curiosity about exactly how far this was about to go. "There he is," Homelander said, and his voice carried none of its old easy charm. "I was starting to wonder if you actually had teeth, or if 2 weeks of noble speeches was all you had in you." "Let her go," Izuku said, and his voice came out steadier than he felt, the particular calm he'd learned to summon in the half-second before a fight became unavoidable. "Whatever she's supposedly done, this isn't the way you handle it. She's been feeding information to an unregistered, potentially hostile asset," Homelander said, gesturing at Izuku with mock reasonableness. "That's a security matter, and it's frankly none of your business. Except you've made it your business, haven't you? 2 weeks of refusing every reasonable offer this company made you, and now here you are, wrecking company property to protect someone who was never yours to protect." He tilted his head, studying Izuku with the specific, unsettling stillness Izuku remembered from their first meeting. "I gave you a chance, a real one. Full backing, full resources, everything this company has. You threw it back in my face to go play hero with Butcher's little crew of terrorists and my own team's traitor. I've been very patient, Deku. I don't think anyone in this city would call me patient. Ask around." "I don't want your resources," Izuku said. "I never did. I want people to stop disappearing every time they get in this company's way." Something shifted behind Homelander's eyes. Not anger, Izuku realized with a chill, but genuine, delighted interest. The specific look of a predator finally getting the fight it had been quietly angling for all along. "You know what I think?" Homelander said, stepping closer, the SUV's crumpled grille still gripped in Izuku's hand. "I think you've spent 2 weeks being very, very careful not to show anyone in this city what you're actually capable of. Careful little demonstrations, careful little speeches. I think you're scared of what happens once everyone sees the real number." His smile widened, sharp and utterly without warmth. "So let's find out together, right now, in front of God and every camera on this block." The first blow came without warning, impossibly fast, a full-strength strike aimed squarely at Izuku's chest, the kind of hit that had, Izuku understood in the fractional second before it landed, ended fights permanently against lesser opponents. He didn't have time to fully brace. He had time only for 2 years of trained instinct to take over completely, one for all surging through every part of him at once, and the punch that should have ended everything instead sent him skidding backward 20 feet across wet asphalt, cracked but not broken, already rising before the dust settled. "There it is," Homelander said, genuine delight coloring his voice now, already closing the distance again. "There it is. God, I've been waiting 2 weeks for someone to actually make this interesting." Izuku met the next strike with everything he had, full cowl blazing green across every inch of him, the specific controlled fury of 2 years spent learning exactly how much of himself he could give a fight without losing himself inside it. And for the first time since falling into this world, the city got to see, in full, uncensored view, exactly what Vought International had spent 2 weeks failing to leash. They fought through the block and into the next one, concrete cracking, an abandoned car folded in half by a strike that went wide, every camera on the street capturing footage that no PR department in the world was going to be able to spin fast enough. Izuku matched Homelander's speed, met his strength blow for blow, and understood, somewhere in the controlled chaos of it, that this wasn't a fight he could win by simply outlasting. Homelander had decades of experience, total confidence, and absolutely no restraint holding him back from tactics Izuku refused to use. "I don't have to win by hurting him worse," Izuku thought, ducking under a strike that would have taken his head off, one for all roaring through every nerve. "I have to win by making sure he can't hurt anyone else while I hold him here." He shifted tactics, not attacking to injure, but to contain, driving Homelander back with a controlled series of strikes designed to keep him occupied, keep his attention locked entirely on Izuku and away from the SUV, away from Annie, away from the gathering crowd of terrified onlookers filming from a careful, insufficient distance. Homelander noticed the shift almost immediately, and something in his expression sharpened into genuine, delighted fascination. "You're not even trying to hurt me," he said, almost laughing, blocking a strike that rattled every window on the block. 2 weeks of speeches about doing the right thing, and here you are, fighting the most dangerous person in this country with one hand tied behind your back. That's either the stupidest thing I've ever seen, or," he paused, something calculating flickering behind the manic delight, "or you actually believe it." "God, you actually believe all of it." "I do," Izuku said, and drove a strike home that finally, genuinely staggered him, the first real damage of the fight, Homelander's confident smile flickering into something rawer and angrier for just a fraction of a second before the mask reasserted itself. Sirens were closing in now, distant but growing. Not police, Izuku understood from the specific cadence, but Vought's own private security, dispatched to contain whatever story this was about to become before the public narrative got away from them entirely. Above the rooftops, a familiar figure dropped down hard into the street between them, silver and blue suit catching the gray morning light. Annie, having fought her way clear of the SUV in the chaos, positioning herself directly between Izuku and Homelander, with a courage that made something in Izuku's chest ache with recognition. "That's enough," Annie said, voice carrying clear and steady across the wrecked street. "Homelander, enough. You've made your point. Everyone on this block has it on video. Ending this here doesn't help you. It just proves every ugly thing people have started whispering about this company for 2 weeks straight." For a long, suspended moment, nobody moved. Homelander's chest heaved, blood at the corner of his mouth, a wound Izuku understood, with a jolt, that this man hadn't taken in longer than most of the crowd watching had been alive, and something behind his eyes, calculating fast, weighing the cameras, the crowd, the growing wail of approaching sirens against whatever satisfaction finishing this fight might have bought him. The smile came back, slow and cold and entirely too controlled for a man who'd just been genuinely hurt for the first time in years. "Fine," Homelander said, straightening his cape with theatrical calm, though Izuku noted the small, betraying stiffness in how he moved. "This round's yours. Enjoy it." His eyes cut to Izuku, and underneath the practiced ease, something genuinely dangerous simmered now, unmasked for the first time. "But you just showed this whole city exactly what you are, Deku. Every camera, every phone, every news crew that's about to descend on this block. You wanted to help people without ever getting your hands dirty? Congratulations. You just started the exact war you spent 2 weeks trying so hard to avoid. He rose into the sky without another word, cape snapping in the wind, gone in seconds, and Izuku stood in the wreckage of a 2-block radius. Annie beside him, sirens closing fast, cameras still rolling from every angle, and understood, with total and unshakable clarity, that whatever careful balance he'd tried to hold between 3 competing factions had just, irreversibly, ended. The true fight hadn't started yet, but it was coming, fast, and this time, there would be no more careful choosing between doors. The 48 hours after the fight on 5th Street reshaped the city faster than anything Izuku had seen since falling into it. The footage was everywhere by noon, dozens of angles, stitched together by anonymous accounts faster than Vought's legal team could file takedown requests, showing exactly what Homelander was capable of, and exactly how a boy in a battered green costume had matched him, blow for blow, without ever throwing a strike meant to kill. Vought's PR machine, so practiced at burying inconvenient truths in 90-second segments, found itself facing something it had never had to manage before. A story too big, too widely witnessed, too thoroughly documented to control. Stan Edgar called an emergency board meeting within hours. Homelander gave a carefully worded television interview, framing the fight as a misunderstanding he deeply regretted, his practiced charm doing damage control that his fists no longer could. And across the city, in apartments and bars and comment sections, people who had spent years accepting Vought's curated version of heroism without question began, for the first time, to ask the kind of questions Izuku had been asking since day one. It wasn't victory. Izuku understood that clearly. Holed up in Butcher's cramped apartment with Annie beside him, Huey pacing, Mother's Milk watching the news with his arms crossed and his jaw tight. It was something more dangerous than victory. It was a wound, inflicted on a machine that had never had to bleed in public before, and wounded machines, Izuku had learned in 2 years of fighting villains, tended to lash out hardest right before they fell. He's not gonna let this go, Butcher said, watching the same broadcast, cigarette burning forgotten between his fingers. Not after getting hurt in front of half the city. He's gonna need something bigger to bury this story under. Something that makes people forget they ever saw him bleed. He was right. The call came that evening, not to Izuku but to Annie, from a contact still inside Vought's walls, breathless and terrified. Homelander had requested full deployment of Vought's Black Ops Containment Division, the same unit that had handled Blue Hawk, the same unit whose existence Izuku had first learned about in a folder of files 2 weeks ago. Target, Izuku Midoriya. Authorization, total force, no restrictions. Stan Edgar's careful arithmetic finally, completely abandoned in favor of Homelander's simpler math. They're not gonna arrest you, Butcher said flatly, reading the same message over Annie's shoulder. This isn't a containment op, this is an execution order dressed up in corporate language. Izuku sat with that for a long moment, the full, final weight of everything 2 weeks in this world had built toward finally arriving, all at once, with nowhere left to retreat to. Then I need to end it before it reaches anyone else, he said quietly. Not run from it, not let it happen in some dark facility upstate where nobody's watching. If Vought wants to show this city what they really are, I'm going to make sure they can't hide from what happens next. The confrontation happened at Vought Tower itself, 12 hours later, and Izuku chose the ground deliberately, the same front steps where he'd once named 4 forgotten dead, into a cluster of reporters' cameras, now ringed by a Black Ops containment team, Vought's private security, and, gathering at the cordon's edge despite every attempt to disperse them, a crowd that had seen the 5th Street footage and come, in numbers Vought's PR team hadn't anticipated, to witness whatever happened next themselves. Homelander met him on the steps, cape settled, expression a careful, controlled mask that didn't quite hide the fury still simmering beneath it from 2 days ago. You didn't have to come here, Homelander said. Could have hidden with your new friends. Made this harder for everyone. I'm not hiding, Izuku said, and his voice carried clear across the plaza, into every camera lens pointed his way. every phone held up by the watching crowd. "I came to end this in front of the people you've spent years lying to, not in some black site where nobody would ever know what happened." "Careful," Homelander said, low. "You're about to find out what happens when I stop holding back." "I know," Izuku said. "I've known since 5th Street. I'm not afraid of what you're capable of, Homelander. I'm afraid of what this entire city becomes if nobody's ever willing to stand where I'm standing right now." The fight that followed was nothing like 5th Street. Faster, harder, both of them fighting now with the full, unrestrained knowledge of exactly what the other was capable of. Homelander abandoned every trace of playful cruelty, fighting instead with cold, total commitment. And Izuku met him with everything 2 years of training and 2 weeks of hard-won clarity had built in him. Full cowl blazing at capacities he'd never dared show this world before, Black Whip lashing out to redirect a killing blow at the last possible second, danger sense screaming warnings a fraction ahead of every strike Homelander tried to land unseen. They tore through the plaza, through scaffolding and stone and glass, and the crowd, held back by a security cordon too thin to actually contain the scale of what was happening, watched in real time as the myth of Vought's flawless, controlled hero machine came apart in full public view. The turning point came not from Izuku's strength, but from something else entirely. Annie, dropping into the fight at exactly the moment Homelander drew back for a strike aimed to kill, placing herself in its path with a courage that stopped Homelander's fist a half-second before impact, not because he feared hurting her. Izuku understood in a flash of horrified clarity, but because a camera 3 feet away had just captured, in perfect, undeniable focus, the exact moment America's most beloved hero had been about to kill someone in front of the entire watching city. Homelander froze, and in that single, suspended second, his mask finally, completely cracking in front of every camera he'd spent a career performing for, Izuku understood exactly how to end this without becoming anything he'd refused to live with. "Look at them," Izuku said, quiet enough that only Homelander could hear it, gesturing at the crowd, the cameras, the entire watching city. "This is the moment they finally see you. Not the poster, not the movie. You, right now, choosing whether to kill someone in front of everyone who's ever believed the lie Vought sold them about who you are." He held Homelander's furious, uncertain gaze. "You can still walk away from this, right now. Or you can prove, in front of the entire world, exactly what Butcher's been trying to tell people for years." The silence stretched, taut and enormous, the entire plaza holding its breath. Then, slowly, Homelander lowered his fist. It wasn't mercy. Izuku understood that immediately, watching the cold, furious calculation replace the mask's cracks as quickly as it had appeared. It was simple, brutal arithmetic. The same arithmetic Stan Edgar had once described, recalculated in real time. A killing blow, captured on 100 cameras, cost more than this fight was worth, even to a man who'd never once had to care about consequences before today. "This isn't over," Homelander said, low, for Izuku alone. "You just made this city think it saw something today. Careful what people do with hope like that. It gets a lot of them killed." He rose into the sky and was gone, and the plaza erupted. Not into celebration, not immediately, but into something rawer and more complicated. A city, watching in real time, beginning to understand exactly how much it had never actually known about the machine that had run its lives for decades. The weeks that followed brought no clean ending, because Izuku had learned by then that this world didn't deal in clean endings, only in slow, hard-won ground, gained one true thing at a time. Vought's stock cratered before it stabilized. Stan Edgar survived the fallout through the same careful arithmetic that had built his empire, though for the first time in decades, a real congressional inquiry followed, however slowly, however imperfectly. Homelander remained free, remained dangerous, remained exactly the kind of unfinished threat that told Izuku this fight was far from over. But he was, for the first time in this world's memory, publicly wounded, publicly witnessed, no longer untouchable in the way his mask had always promised. Annie left Vought's employ within the month, choosing at last the fight she'd spent years hoping to wage from the inside. now waged openly instead. Ashley Barrett quietly, carefully, began feeding information to exactly the kinds of people her job had once required her to silence. A small rebellion, unglamorous, but real. Dr. Reyes found work again, eventually, at a lab that didn't ask her to look away from things that mattered. And Butcher, watching it all from the cramped apartment above the shuttered laundromat, allowed himself, for the first time in longer than he could remember, something almost like hope, cautious, unpracticed, but genuine. Izuku never did find a way home. He searched, in the weeks and months that followed, every lead Vought's research division and Cole's quiet government resources could offer him, and found nothing that promised a door back to the world he'd left behind. Some nights, that loss sat heavy and permanent in his chest, a grief he suspected would never fully soften. But he'd found something else instead, not a system that would tell him who to be, not a faction that could claim him as its asset or its weapon or its product, but a city, slowly, painfully beginning to believe that power without a code behind it was worth questioning, and a small, stubborn circle of people willing to stand beside him while he proved, one hard choice at a time, that a hero built on the simple, unglamorous decision to help people could survive even in a world built to make sure people like him never lasted. He stood, some evenings, at the edge of a rooftop that had become his, not Vought's, not the government's, just his, looking out over a skyline that had never stopped feeling foreign and had, somehow, slowly started to feel like something worth protecting anyway. Home is wherever people need someone who won't stop showing up, he thought, the words worn smooth from repeating them to himself through every hard choice of the past 2 months. I couldn't find my way back, but I think, maybe, I found what I was for. Somewhere below, the city carried on, imperfect, still dangerous, still very far from fixed, but different now, in ways too small for any camera to fully capture, and too real for Vought's machine to ever fully bury again.